Chapter 800. Even though he'd faintly discerned from the conversation between Duan Lingtian and Zishang that Duan Lingtian seemed to be able to counter Zishang in the illusory purgatory today. But he didn't know how Duan Lingtian countered Zishang. Zishang glanced indifferently at Lu Yong yet didn't say anything. What a joke. He wasn't stupid to the point of revealing his weakness. Seeming to have discerned the deep meaning in Zishang's eyes, Lu Yong smiled embarrassedly and called out, "Let's go, I'll take you to see Master." In the spacious courtyard, Zishang once again saw the Vice Fort Master of Skywolf Fort, Feng Wei. Vice Fort Master Feng. Zishang nodded indifferently to Feng Wei and wasn't very warm. Even though Feng Wei was the Vice Fort Master of Skywolf Fort and was a supreme existence to him now, but since that strand of incomplete soul resided in his body, he knew that even if it was an existence at the 7th level of the void transformation stage or above, it was similarly an existence that was like an ant before a true expert. Whereas his future was far from something that a mere void transformation stage martial artist could restrain. He was an existence that wanted to become a martial monarch or even Emperor Wu. "You're Zishang." Feng Wei's face instantly sank when he saw Zishang actually had such a proud attitude when facing him. Whoosh! Instantly, a terrifying imposing aura swept out from his body and pressed down onto Zishang, and he wanted to make Zishang lower his arrogant head. But unfortunately, he quickly noticed that Zishang seemed as if he was utterly unable to notice his imposing aura. From the beginning until the end, Zishang had a calm expression, and at the same time, Zishang looked at him with a spurious smile. Instantly, Feng Wei's face sank, and he didn't hold back any longer as he urged his strongest imposing aura to sweep out with the intention of making Zishang bow. But unfortunately, even though his imposing aura was like a storm, Zishang still stood towering without moving. "Vice Fort Master Feng, don't waste your energy. Let's get down to business." Zishang spoke with slight impatience. A mere void transformation stage martial artist wanted to use his imposing aura to suppress him? After all, he wasn't alone now. And there was another formidable soul concealed within his body. Even though it was only a strand of incomplete soul, it wasn't something that the imposing aura of a mere void transformation stage martial artist could suppress. Purple disease. Right when Feng Wei's eyes emitted killing intent, Lu Yong's face went grim, and he glared furiously at Zishang. "Please show some respect when speaking to my master." "Respect?" Zishang glanced indifferently at Lu Yong and laughed with disdain. "Lu Yong, are you even qualified to talk about respect with me? If I knew earlier that you were unable to kill Duan Lingtian in the illusory purgatory today, I would absolutely not have let you off." "Good, very good." Feng Wei glanced deeply at Zishang and suppressed the flames of rage in his heart as he said in a low voice, "I heard from this disciple of mine that your strength would increase explosively after that black-colored flame brand appeared between your brows? From the 1st level void interpretation to the 5th level void interpretation in an instant?" As he finished speaking, Feng Wei's eyes revealed greed. "If I'm not wrong, you ought to have executed some sort of secret technique, right? Secret skill." Zishang was stunned for a moment before he smiled disdainfully. "I know you won't admit it, but I still advise you to obediently hand over that secret technique. Otherwise, this day next year will be the anniversary of your death." Feng Wei completely shed all pretenses, and terrifying killing intent arose from his body as it swept towards Zishang. In next to no time, Feng Wei was stunned, because he noticed that Zishang's expression didn't change in the slightest when facing his killing intent, and Zishang seemed as if Zishang was fearless. "You're not afraid of death?" Feng Wei's face sank. "No one isn't afraid of death." Zishang shook his head. "Then why are you still so composed when you're about to die?" Feng Wei asked with a low voice. "The reason I'm composed is because I firmly believe that you, Vice Fort Master Feng, won't kill me. Because once you kill me, then not only will you be unable to obtain that secret technique you guessed, you'll even be unable to obtain a treasure that's within easy reach of you, Vice Fort Master Feng." Zishang spoke confidently. "Stop trying to be mysterious." Feng Wei grunted coldly. "If I'm not wrong, Vice Fort Master Feng, you've come looking for me mainly because you want to know the ability of that Duan Lingtian, right? Actually, when it comes to dealing with Duan Lingtian, we're all people on the same boat. All of you want Duan Lingtian to die, and I want him to die as well." Zishang spoke frankly. You're extremely smart. But compared to killing Duan Lingtian, I'm more interested in that secret technique you possess. Feng Wei glanced deeply at Zishang. Secret technique? Zishang started laughing. Vice Fort Master Feng, if you think I know some secret technique, then you're gravely mistaken. Cloud Continent is so huge, besides ordinary human martial artists and the various demon beasts, Vice Fort Master Feng ought to have heard of variants, right? Variants? Feng Wei's pupils couldn't help but constrict when he heard this. Even though he'd never seen a variant of legend with his own two eyes, he'd seen introductions related to variants in some unorthodox books. Variants were the product of the union between a human and a demon. Moreover, the probability of them being born was extremely low. On Cloud Continent, so long as a demon beast broke through to the void transformation stage, it would be a demon that could take human form and be no different than an ordinary human. After these demons took human form, many of them would mate with humans and give birth to the next generation. Normally speaking, the union between a human and a demon would either give birth to a pure human or a pure demon beast. But there were exceptions. Supposedly, there was a 1 in 10,000 chance that a variable would appear in the union between a human and a demon, and that variable was the extremely rare variants on Cloud Continent. Variants were divided into two types, and they belonged to two extremes. One of them was mediocre, and it was even to the extent that their natural talent and comprehension ability were far inferior to their parents. The other type instead possessed an extremely heaven-defying cultivation and natural talent. This type of variant might be a human or a demon beast. They had a common point, and that was they possessed some sort of extremely terrifying ability. It was an ability they were born with, and it was difficult to replicate and was unique. According to rumor, this ability was called an innate ability. What you mean is, you're a variant? Whereas that ability of yours that's capable of improving your strength in a short period of time is your innate ability. When Feng Wei looked at Zishang once more, his pupils constricted slightly, and his voice was filled with surprise. After all, the variant and innate ability were things he'd seen in books, and he'd never encountered them in reality. I never imagined that Vice Fort Feng would be so knowledgeable, and actually know of the innate ability of us variants. Zishang started laughing extremely brilliantly. Of course he was laughing coldly in his heart. Actually, a moment ago he didn't know what a variant was, nor did he know what an innate ability was. All of this was taught to him by the ghost flame concealed within his body, and it was only for the sake of deceiving the Vice Fort Master of Skywolf Fort before him. Of course, no matter if it was a variant or an innate ability, according to Elder Ghost, they really existed. But Zishang wasn't one. Since you said that you are an anomaly, I would really like to see your innate ability. Feng Wei stared at Zishang with a burning gaze. What he wanted to do the most now was to confirm if Zishang's ability was a secret technique or an innate ability. If it was a secret technique, then it would surely have a certain side effect and he was able to discern it. On the other hand, an innate ability was an ability that variants were born with, and it didn't have any side effects. As you wish. Zishang nodded. In the next moment, the origin energy in his entire body roiled, causing the energy of the heavens and the earth to roil before condensing into 20 ancient horned dragon silhouettes. First level of the void interpretation stage. In next to no time, a small black dot started to appear between Zishang's brows, and it swiftly grew larger after it appeared before transforming into a strand of black-colored flame brand in the end. Right at this moment, the gaze Feng Wei shot at the phenomenon of the heavens and the earth above Zishang changed slightly. The phenomenon of the heavens and the earth there instantly underwent a tremendous change, and another 50 ancient horned dragon silhouettes instantly appeared by the side of the 20 ancient horned dragon silhouettes. Merely his origin energy was comparable to the strength of 70 ancient horned dragons. It was precisely the symbol of the fifth level of the void interpretation stage. Time silently flowed by. After half an hour, the black-colored flame brand between Zishang's brows gradually faded, whereas the 50 ancient horned dragon silhouettes that appeared above him gradually dispersed, and the origin energy that skyrocketed on his body was restrained by more than half. As for Zishang himself, he still had a calm expression, and it was impossible to discern that what he'd done earlier had any side effects on him. Lu Yong, who stood at the side, couldn't help but gasp. Half an hour. Never had he imagined that Zishang would actually be able to maintain a state of the 5th level of the void interpretation stage for half an hour. After all, after Zishang erupted with his strength at the 5th level of the void interpretation stage that day, he'd crushed him in the blink of an eye, and he'd suppressed him to the point he didn't have the slightest strength to fight back. It's truly an innate ability. Feng Wei's pupils constricted, and after he saw Zishang didn't suffer any side effects, he believed Zishang. I truly never imagined that I, Feng Wei, would actually be able to see a variant of legend in my lifetime. I'm truly fortunate, and that innate ability of legend is actually so terrifying that it's capable of allowing a 1st-level void interpretation stage martial artist to advance his strength to the 5th level of the void interpretation stage in a short period of time. Feng Wei sighed, and then he seemed to have thought of something and asked, according to my knowledge, even if it's the innate ability of a variant, it requires the consumption of spiritual force. Does this innate ability of yours have any restrictions? It can continue for almost an hour every day. Zishang was prepared since long ago, and he replied calmly. Almost an hour every day? Feng Wei and Lu Yong's pupils constricted at the same time, and they couldn't help but curse in unison. Freak! Zishang, could it be that Duan Lingtian is a variant as well? Suddenly, Feng Wei seemed to have thought of something, and he couldn't help but ask. I heard from Yong that you said that Duan Lingtian is able to execute soul skills? Chapter 801. Duan Lingtian? A variant? Originally, Zishang didn't think of Duan Lingtian as a variant, but now that he'd been reminded by Feng Wei, he couldn't help but be stunned. Elder Ghost, haven't you always been unable to discern why Duan Lingtian was able to execute soul skills? Do you think it's possible that he's a variant? Zishang contacted the strand of incomplete soul that was hidden within Zishang's body and asked with a low voice. It's possible. After a short moment, an aged and ghastly voice sounded out. Of course, it's also possible that it's because of other things. There's nothing absolute in this world. No one dares say that he knows everything. Zishang's pupils constricted, and slight fear was faintly mixed within his eyes as he guessed. I feel that it's very likely that he's a variant. Otherwise, how could he possibly possess such a formidable strength at such a young age? No matter if Duan Lingtian is a variant or not, he can't be allowed to live. I have a feeling that if you don't kill him as soon as possible, then the one that dies in the future will only be you. Elder Ghost's voice was filled with fear. Moreover, he possesses the Devil Seal Tablet and knows of my existence, and he knows that the Devil Seal Tablet is capable of countering me. Once you die, it's impossible for me to survive as well. So, Elder Ghost, you must help me. Let's see how we can completely annihilate Duan Lingtian in this world once and for all. Zishang's eyes flashed with cold lights as he spoke fiercely. I'll absolutely not allow him to live. Elder Ghost's ghastly and hoarse voice was filled with icy cold and bone-piercing killing intent, and it caused Zishang to be unable to refrain from shuddering. Up until now, even he didn't know the true ability of this Elder Ghost. But he knew that when Elder Ghost was at his prime, he was absolutely an expert at the Emperor Wu realm or above. Zishang? Feng Wei couldn't help but frown and remind Zishang when he saw Zishang didn't answer his question and was instead in a daze. Zishang returned to his senses. Vice Fort Master Feng, you've really guessed correctly. There's something that I've thought about for a long time, and I intend to tell you. Speak. Feng Wei's brows raised, and he felt slight anticipation. The reason I wanted to kill that Duan Lingtian was because he could restrain my innate ability. He and I are both anomalies, but his bloodline is rather special. The attack I unleashed after I cast my innate ability will automatically disperse and return to its normal strength before it even gets close to him. Zishang said slowly. These words were taught to him by the Ghost Elder. I see. Feng Wei nodded with sudden understanding, and then he asked with a smile. Zishang, you ought to feel extremely uncomfortable in your heart with such a nemesis, right? Of course. I can't wait to tear him into pieces and grind his bones to dust. Zishang's expression turned serious as he spoke fiercely. Very good. Since that's the case, we have a common enemy. Do you have a way to deal with him? Feng Wei asked. Unless I enter the illusory purgatory once more and ask Lu Yong to kill him. Otherwise, no matter if it's me or Lu Yong, We don't have the strength to kill him. Zishang shook his head and said, Illusory purgatory? Feng Wei frowned. That illusory purgatory consumes an enormous amount of energy every time it's activated. It's not too possible to activate it once more. If it's like this, then it's extremely difficult to kill him during the later selections of the martial competition of the 10 dynasties, Zishang said. Just how strong is that illusory realm soul skill that he used? According to my knowledge, no matter if it's those special demon beasts with extraordinary natural talent or the legendary experts like Emperor Wu, their spiritual force abilities are at most targeted towards existences with spiritual forces similar to their own or weaker than their own. Feng Wei frowned. Yong is a third-level void interpretation stage martial artist, and his spiritual force is at the third level of the void interpretation stage as well. Could it be that Duan Lingtian's cultivation has stepped into the third level of the void interpretation stage as well? As he finished speaking, Feng Wei's pupils couldn't help but constrict. Vice Fort Master Feng, that Duan Lingtian is unlike ordinary martial artists. According to my estimations, he ought to have consumed a type of spirit fruit that improves the level of his soul, causing his spiritual force to be 2 levels higher than his cultivation. Zishang said, 1 year ago, I witnessed his illusory realm soul skill during the Dark Han Dynasty's martial competition. At that time, his cultivation was at the 9th level of the void initiation stage, yet his spiritual force was at the 2nd level of the void interpretation stage. What? Feng Wei was greatly shocked, as he'd heard of spirit fruits that were capable of improving the level of the soul. In this way, once he breaks through to the 1st level of the void interpretation stage, his spiritual force will break through to the 3rd level of the void interpretation stage along with him? Yes. Zishang nodded, and then he said with a fearful expression, moreover, according to my estimations, his current cultivation is probably not as simple as the 1st level of the void interpretation stage, and it's extremely likely that he has already broken through to the 2nd level of the void interpretation stage. 2nd level of the void interpretation stage? A young man that's only 28 years old? Feng Wei couldn't help but gasp. At this moment, he'd started to truly take Duan Lingtian to be a genius figure that possessed extraordinary natural talent that he could examine head-on. In other words, it's extremely likely that his current spiritual force is at the 4th level of the void interpretation stage. Feng Wei took a deep breath. If it's really like this, then once he executes that soul skill, there's probably no one amongst the young geniuses of the 10 dynasties that are participating in the martial competition this time that's a match for him. Not necessarily. If there's an existence amongst the remaining 40+ young geniuses of the 10 dynasties that has broken through to the 4th level of the void interpretation stage, and is an inscription master at the same time, then perhaps they'll just happen to be able to counter Duan Lingtian and defeat him. Zishang said. Would there be such an existence? Feng Wei frowned and felt slight disbelief. Nothing is absolute. Zishang continued. Once an existence like that appears, I believe that so long as Vice Fort Master Feng makes a heavy promise and asks him to help you kill Duan Lingtian, he ought to not refuse. When Zishang spoke up to hear, he revealed an evil smile. Humph. Feng Wei glanced coldly and indifferently at Zishang and grunted. If it really comes to that time, then the happiest person would probably be you, Zishang, right? Vice Fort Master Feng, you can't speak like this. Everyone's just happy together. Zishang smiled indifferently. Right, you said earlier that I'll be able to obtain a treasure that's easily obtainable. What's that? Feng Wei asked when he recalled what Zishang had said earlier. Vice Fort Master Feng, that was actually only a delaying tactic of mine and I spoke casually. Vice Fort Master Feng is wise. You knew since the beginning that I was deliberately mystifying things. Zishang spoke unhurriedly, and a bright light flashed within the depths of his eyes. Since no matter if he spoke of the existence of the Devil Seal Tablet or not, the members of Skywolf Fort would kill Duan Lingtian, then why should he speak of the Devil Seal Tablet? Once the Devil Seal Tablet fell into the hands of the members of Skywolf Fort, even though he could take it back in the future, but who knew if an unexpected event would occur during this period of time? Let's see if there's an existence amongst those young geniuses that isn't afraid of Duan Lingtian's illusory realm soul skill. Once there is, then under the promise of the Vice Fort Master of Skywolf Fort, that person will surely make a move to kill Duan Lingtian. whereas the spatial ring in Duan Lingtian's possession will most probably fall into the hands of that person, even if he's in existence at the 4th level of the void interpretation stage. So long as I allow Elder Ghost to possess him, I'll similarly be able to kill him in a short period of time and seize Duan Lingtian's spatial ring. Zishang started to calculate in his heart. Of course, if no one is able to suppress Duan Lingtian in the later selections of the martial competition of the 10 dynasties, at that time, I'll tell Fengwei that Duan Lingtian possesses the Devil Seal tablet that can amplify one's strength by 100%. For the sake of the Devil Seal tablet, I believe Fengwei will stop at nothing to kill Duan Lingtian. Zishang made 2 preparations for his scheme. Duan Lingtian, you're dead for sure this time. Zishang's eyes were filled with extreme icy coldness. Duan Lingtian naturally didn't know of all this that had occurred in the inner fort. Presently, he was silently comprehending wind concept within his room in the Narcissus Pavilion. Duan Lingtian, who held the wind concept fragment in his hand, had strands of clearly visible strong winds coiled around his body, and the strong winds were deep and ceaselessly strengthened. At this moment, Duan Lingtian felt as if he'd completely fused into the wind. He was the wind and the wind was him. As he meditated and comprehended, Duan Lingtian forgot the time. Elder brother Duan. Duan Lingtian only returned to his senses when a familiar voice sounded out by his ears, and he put away the wind concept fragment in his hand. Tianwu. After opening the door, Duan Lingtian noticed that dawn had already appeared in the horizon, and a new day had officially arrived. Elder brother Duan, we ought to go over. Feng Tianwu, who'd rested for an entire night, seemed to be even more beautiful and moving. It wasn't just that. Duan Lingtian even noticed some slight changes on her. Tianwu wouldn't have broken through, right? Duan Lingtian was stunned, and then his spiritual force stretched out along with this, and he heaved a sigh of relief when he noticed that Feng Tianwu's cultivation was still at the 1st level of the void interpretation stage. Looks like I was too suspicious. Right, Tianwu has only broken through to the 1st level of the void interpretation stage a few days ago. Even if she wants to break through, she would at least have to wait for another period of time. Duan Lingtian shook his head and walked side by side with Feng Tianwu, and after they converged with Feng Wudao, they headed towards the combat arena. At the same time, there were already many people in the sky above the combat arena. Duan Lingtian. Brother Lingtian. Not long after, Su Li and Zhang Shouyong had arrived as well. Sword 13, who walked in front of Su Li, nodded to Duan Lingtian's group of 3, and it could be considered as a greeting. Whoosh! Whoosh! In next to no time, Saber 5 and Long Yun arrived as scheduled. In next to no time, all the representatives and young geniuses of the 10 dynasties had arrived. After a night of rest, all the representatives of the 10 dynasties were in high spirits, and they completely didn't have the dispirited state they had when they saw the corpses of all the young geniuses at dusk yesterday. Whoosh! A howl of the wind sounded out from the direction of the inner fort, and it caused everyone to be unable to refrain from raising their heads to look over. A tall young man flew over and arrived in the sky above the combat arena in the blink of an eye. Lu Yong. Chapter 802. Just as everyone present had thought, not long after Lu Yong made an appearance, the 2 vice fort masters of Skywolf Fort appeared in the sky above the combat arena. Vice Fort Master. Vice Fort Master Ning. Vice Fort Master Feng. The representatives and young geniuses of the various dynasties bowed successively to Ning Can and Feng Wei. Ning Can and Feng Wei nodded lightly. In next to no time, Ning Can said with a sonorous voice, "The martial competition of the 10 dynasties will continue today. The second round of the selections will be held in the illusory crypt of our Skywolf Fort." Illusory crypt. Instantly, all the representatives and young geniuses of the 10 dynasties couldn't help but reveal bewildered expressions. Obviously, they didn't know what sort of place the illusory crypt was. Whoosh! 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 In next to no time, everyone saw the 10 elders of Skywolf Fort that had appeared yesterday flash out from the inner fort and appear before everyone. You open the exit of the illusory crypt. Ningkan looked at one of the elders of Skywolf Fort and spoke indifferently. Yes. The elder of Skywolf Fort that was named replied respectfully, and then he dived down to descend at the top right corner of the combat arena. Bang! Under the gazes of everyone present, the elder of Skywolf Fort stomped down, and the wide floor tile at the top right corner of the combat arena actually loosened and showed signs of leaving the ground. Subsequently, the elder of Skywolf Fort made a move and actually forcefully removed the wide floor tile. In next to no time, everyone was shocked by the scene beneath the wide floor tile. An expanse of mist was slowly rising there, and it caused them to be unable to see through what was within it. This is the exit of the illusory crypt. All 50 of you have to enter from the other 50 entrances and pass through the entire illusory crypt. Ning Can's voice sounded out in a timely manner, and it caused all the young geniuses including Duan Lingtian to recover from their shock. 50 entrances? Everyone was shocked. They did not expect that a mere underground palace would have so many entrances. The rules of the second round of selection are not difficult for any of you. The 50 of you will enter the illusory underground palace from 50 different entrances. After you enter, you will need to pass through the various checkpoints in the underground palace with the fastest speed possible, and come out from the only exit. Ningkan continued. When all of you are about to exit the entrance of the illusory crypt, all of you will see a total of 50 numbered tokens. The 50 numbered tokens are numbered 1 to 50, and they represent the specific rankings of the second round of the selections. The second round of selection will not eliminate anyone. It will only list the rankings. As soon as Ningkan finished speaking, the gazes of most young geniuses lit up. Not eliminating anyone meant that the second round of selections would not be like the first round. There would not be any danger. In addition, I want to remind all of you of one thing which is also the most important thing. After entering the illusory crypt, the person who obtains the top ranking token will have the right to choose their opponent first. For example, the person that obtains the number 1 token can choose their opponent first in the third round of selections. After that, the person that obtains the number 2 token can choose their opponent first, and so on and so forth. In the second round of selections, the person that obtains the last ranking token doesn't have the right to choose their opponent in the third round of selections, and they can only be chosen. Besides that, even though the person that obtains the number 1 to 10 token can choose their opponent first, they can't challenge each other, and can only choose to challenge people that aren't in the top 10. Ningkan continued. For a time, the gazes of the group of young geniuses including Duan Lingtian lit up. The person that obtained the top ranking token could choose their opponent at will in the third round of selections. Besides that, the person that obtained the number 1 to 10 token was actually able to obtain immunity in the third round of selections, and they wouldn't be challenged by others. The higher the number token obtained, the more benefits there are. If one is able to obtain the number 1 to 10 token, then it would be awesome. Not only would one not be challenged, one would even be able to challenge the person that obtained the last ranking token. Looks like I have to go all out in this second round of selections. I'll surely strive to obtain the number 1 to 10 token. In the sky above the combat arena, most of the young geniuses of the 10 dynasties seemed as if they'd taken stimulants, and all of them were extremely excited. They wanted to obtain the number tokens that were ranked at the top. Only in this way would they have the chance to obtain the opportunity to advance in the third round of selections. Even though the second round of selections wouldn't eliminate anyone, but based on the current situation, there would surely be many people that would be eliminated in the third round of selections. If one wanted to advance in the third round of selections, then the ranking of the number tokens in the second round of selections was extremely important. This second round of selections is slightly interesting. The young geniuses that obtain the number 1 to 10 token are surely top figures amongst the 50 young geniuses present. During the third round of selections, these 10 people won't fight each other, and the most exciting battles will be left for the end. Zhang Shouyang's eyes flashed as he spoke with a light smile. Looks like the third round of selections ought to be to decide on the top 10 people in the martial competition of the 10 dynasties this time, whereas the fourth round of selections is probably the final round of selections, and it ought to decide on the exact rankings of the top 10. As he finished speaking, Su Li couldn't help but guess. It ought to be like this. Duan Lingtian nodded in agreement. The third and fourth round of selections are undoubtedly the final highlight of the martial competition of the 10 dynasties this time. If we're able to obtain the number 1 to 10 token, then we'll be able to occupy the initiative in the third round of selections. So long as we're not defeated by the person we challenged, we'll be able to easily occupy the top 10 positions in the martial competition of the 10 dynasties this time. Feng Tianwu spoke with slight anticipation. Even though it's like this, but it isn't so easy to obtain the number 1 to 10 token. After all, there's a total of 50 people that are competing for those 10 number tokens. Duan Lingtian shook his head. Yet he wasn't so optimistic. 50 entrances and 1 exit. Obviously, everyone will gather at a single place in the illusory crypt of the second round of selections. That place ought to be the place where the 50 number tokens are stored. Feng Wudao said, once a few people enter that place at the same time, they'll surely make a move to seize the number tokens that are ranked at the front. I'm afraid a battle can't be avoided in this second round of selections, unless you're willing to take the number tokens that are ranked at the back. Feng Wudao's words caused Duan Lingtian and the others to deeply agree. If they entered the place where the number tokens were stored at the same time as another, then they would surely not watch as the number tokens that were ranked at the front were taken away by another. 50 people all want to obtain the number 1 to 10 token. This competition will surely be horrifying. Duan Lingtian's eyes emitted a firm sheen as he resolved in his heart. No matter what, I'm determined to obtain the number tokens in the top 10. Not only that, my objective is the number 1 token. Even though the number tokens ranked in the top 10 possess special privileges, but it was undoubtedly the number 1 token that possessed the greatest privilege. The person that obtained the number 1 token was able to choose an opponent first. At that time, they were entirely capable of directly challenging the person that was ranked at the end and had obtained the number 50 token. Actually, it wasn't only Duan Lingtian who thought like this, the other 49 young geniuses thought like this as well. Now, all of you follow the 10 elders of my Skywolf Fort and head to the 50 entrances of the illusory crypt. Vice Fort Master Feng will go with all of you, and at that time, all of you can enter together after he gives the order. Ningkan spoke out. Let's go. As soon as Ningkan finished speaking, Feng Wei gave the order and flashed out first. Instantly, all the representatives and young geniuses of the 10 dynasties followed him, and Sword 13 and Saber 5 were amongst them. For a time, only Ningkan remained in the sky above the combat arena. After a short moment, their group arrived at the eastern area of the outer fort of Skywolf Fort. At that place, a total of 50 wide tiles had been opened up to reveal the pitch-black true appearance that entered their eyes. The 50 of you stand in front of an entrance and wait for my command before entering together. Feng Wei spoke indifferently. Instantly, the young geniuses of the 10 dynasties flashed out successively to stand at the side of the entrance to the illusory crypt, and they were prepared to enter at any moment. Let's go. Duan Lingtian and the others flashed out as well. At the same time, they sent voice transmissions into the ears of Feng Tianwu, Su Li, and Zhang Shouyong. Everything within this illusory crypt is unknown to us. But since Vice Fort Master Ning said that there are layer upon layer of barriers within, then I presume it wouldn't be too simple. If we want to pass through it, we'll probably encounter many difficulties and obstacles. No matter how difficult it is, we'll surely pass through it with our fastest speed. Feng Tianwu's group of 3 were filled with confidence. The corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth couldn't help but be suffused with a wisp of a grin when he saw their states weren't bad, and he followed them to descend at the side of an entrance. At the same time, the other young geniuses took their positions successively. Suddenly, Duan Lingtian noticed a cold and fierce gaze looking at him, and he couldn't help but instantly raise his head to meet the gaze. Zishang. Duan Lingtian's face sank as he looked at the owner of the cold and fierce gaze, and his eyes flickered with killing intent. Duan Lingtian, that illusory realm soul skill of yours isn't of much use in the second round of the selections. You probably don't have the chance to obtain one of the top 10 tokens. Zishang's voice transmission was transmitted over, and it was filled with dense ridicule. Just you wait. I'll obtain token number 1. You're bound to be trampled beneath my feet. Zishang continued. As far as Zishang was concerned, so long as he allowed the incomplete soul of Elder Ghost to possess him, his strength would increase explosively, and it would be extremely easy for him to pass through the illusory crypt. He believed that he would pass through the illusory crypt on his first try and obtain token number 1. Duan Lingtian laughed with ridicule and mocked via voice transmission. So what if you've obtained the number 1 token? even if I'm unable to obtain one of the top 10 tokens. Do you dare challenge me? Do you dare challenge me? Chapter 803. Humph. A cold light flashed within Zishang's eyes as he stared at Duan Lingtian, and he muttered with a voice that only he could hear. Duan Lingtian, feel free to be complacent now. I can't be bothered to fuss about it with a person that's about to die. No matter what all of you encounter within the illusory crypt, all of you have to do is charge forward blindly, until you arrive at the end of the crypt and choose a number command token. Then you can leave from the exit at the combat arena. Feng Wei said. When he saw the group of young geniuses had already taken their positions, Feng Wei suddenly shouted out loudly. Enter! Enter! Feng Wei's loud shout was like a thunderclap that pierced into the ears of the 50 young geniuses, including Duan Lingtian. The 50 young geniuses shuddered and leaped into the entrance of the illusory crypt successively. After Duan Lingtian entered the entrance of the illusory crypt, he noticed that he'd entered an underground passageway, and his surroundings were filled with potholes on the walls. Whirlwind. After he entered, Duan Lingtian didn't hesitate and hurriedly utilized his movement technique with all his strength to swiftly dash forward. Of course, at the same time that he dashed out, he didn't forget to stretch out his spiritual force to sweep forward. Once anything was off ahead, he would be able to notice it at the first possible moment. Suddenly, the spiritual force that Duan Lingtian stretched out trembled slightly. There's a situation. Duan Lingtian's gaze squinted abruptly as he looked ahead. Even though he'd realized that something was off there, his speed didn't slow down in the slightest. Every second counts. Swoosh! Duan Lingtian, who'd entered the illusory crypt, was like a wild horse that had escaped its reins, and he only knew how to arrive at his destination and completely disregarded everything else. It's wind. After flashing forward for a while, Duan Lingtian finally noticed what welcomed him. It was the piercingly cold strong winds that practically filled the entire passageway and ceaselessly assaulted him. These piercingly cold gales were accompanied by some material wind blades that contained extremely terrifying offensive strength. Whoosh! Duan Lingtian didn't dare hesitate when facing the impact of the wind that assaulted him, and the origin energy on his body skyrocketed before transforming into waves of piercingly cold strong winds that coiled around his body. Whirlwind. Facing the oncoming gales and wind blades, Duan Lingtian, who was enveloped by the vast gales, was not afraid in the slightest. He faced them head-on, allowing the biting cold gales and wind blades to sweep his body. Whoosh! 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 After a short moment, the material wind concept around Duan Lingtian's body was pressed down by the strong winds and wind blades that assaulted him to the point of almost collapsing, whereas his speed was forcefully pushed down to slow down. Boom! Boom! Without any hesitation, Duan Lingtian's pair of iron fists were surrounded by strong winds, and then swept forward, colliding with the oncoming astral winds and wind blades. In an instant, the resistance Duan Lingtian felt lessened. There's a chance. Duan Lingtian's eyes lit up. He raised his hand and a sword appeared in his hand. It was a sword that exuded a terrifying aura. A quasi-royal Great Spirit sword. At any rate, Duan Lingtian was able to confirm that there wasn't a second person here, whereas the oncoming astral winds and wind blades were formed from an inscription formation, so there was utterly no need for him to conceal his strength. For the sake of arriving at the end of the illusory crypt as soon as possible, in other words the exit, he had to go all out. Swish! With a raise of his hand, Duan Lingtian commanded the quasi-royal Great Spirit sword as if it was his arm, and it abruptly pierced forward. Instantly, two divine dragons that were completely condensed from material wind concept whistled out, and two pairs of eyes shot out for extremely bright lights as they welcomed the strong winds and wind blades that assaulted their faces. Instantly, the astral winds and wind blades were suppressed to a certain extent, and it also gave Duan Lingtian a chance to pass through. Just a little bit more. Duan Lingtian's gaze was firm as he swiftly flashed out with the intention of charging through the last strand of astral winds and wind blades that assaulted his face. The spiritual force he stretched out already told him that so long as he passed through the last strand of astral winds and wind blades that assaulted his face, he would have passed through the first barrier of the illusory crypt. Whirlwind. Swoosh. The quasi-royal Great Spirit sword in Duan Lingtian's hand opened up a path, and his entire body had perfectly fused with the material wind concept on the quasi-royal grade spirit sword, causing his entire body to seem as if it had transformed into a sword. If someone was here and saw Duan Lingtian's current situation, that person would surely notice to his surprise that Duan Lingtian had practically fused into one with the quasi-royal grade spirit sword in his hand. The material wind concept that suffused his body and sword had practically formed an enormous sword, and only Duan Lingtian and the quasi-royal grade spirit sword that were concealed within it could be faintly seen. At this moment, the quasi-royal grade spirit sword seemed to be the tip of this enormous sword, whereas Duan Lingtian's entire body was the body of this enormous sword. Swish! The enormous sword tore through the sky like a swift arrow that was shot out from a strong bow. At this moment, the oncoming astral winds and wind blades were split apart from the tip of the enormous sword and were completely dispersed to the sides, causing the obstruction towards Duan Lingtian to grow smaller and smaller. "I've finally come over." In just an instant, Duan Lingtian had passed through the section of the cave passageway where the astral winds and wind blades raged, and the inscription formation that condensed the astral winds and wind blades was left far behind him. Continue. After passing through the first inscription formation, Duan Lingtian didn't dare hesitate and continued forward. After a short moment after turning a corner, Duan Lingtian felt a flash before his eyes, and balls of red-colored scorching flames actually burned ahead, and it was like a sea of fire. First it was wind, now it's fire. They're all inscription formations that were formed from origin stones combined with concept fragments. Duan Lingtian's gaze flashed, and he didn't slow down in the slightest as he continued forward. These inscription formations probably weren't left behind by that martial monarch stage expert, right? Duan Lingtian thought in his heart. If it was an inscription formation left behind by a martial monarch stage expert, then the spiritual force contained within it was exceedingly strong, and he was utterly incapable of interfering with it with his current spiritual force. On the other hand, if it wasn't an inscription formation left behind by a martial monarch stage expert, then he would most likely be able to interfere with it with his spiritual force and even temporarily shut it off. After approaching the flames ahead, Duan Lingtian felt a wave of heat assault his face, and even the piercingly cold strong winds that flashed on the surface of his body were unable to obstruct it. This obviously showed how formidable the flames were. Spiritual force. Without the slightest hesitation, Duan Lingtian's spiritual force swept out, and after it entered the flames, it spread to the walls of the cave passageway. After a short moment, he noticed the fluctuation of the numerous inscription markings that formed the inscription formation. "Looks like I was thinking too much. Why would a martial monarch stage expert help Skywolf Fort construct such a simple inscription formation?" Duan Lingtian had never forgotten that the illusory purgatory during the first round of the martial competition of the 10 dynasties was constructed from an inscription formation left behind by a martial monarch stage expert. This caused Duan Lingtian to subconsciously think that the inscription formation in Skywolf Fort was constructed by a martial monarch stage expert. The facts proved that he was thinking too much. Duan Lingtian's spiritual force passed through the inscription formation without encountering any resistance, and an inscription formation like this was simply child's play to him. In the memories of Samsara Emperor Wu, there were numerous methods to destroy such a shallow and simple inscription formation. Of course, with Duan Lingtian's current spiritual force, he was unable to destroy this inscription formation because even though this inscription formation wasn't constructed by a martial monarch stage expert, it was constructed by a void transformation stage inscription master. With Duan Lingtian's current spiritual force, he was only able to temporarily shut it off, and was unable to destroy it. But this is enough. With a thought in his heart, Duan Lingtian's spiritual force that had fused into the inscription formation suddenly flashed. In the next moment, the flames that filled a section of the cavern gradually extinguished. Whirlwind. At the same time, Duan Lingtian easily passed through the area enveloped by the inscription formation. As Duan Lingtian withdrew his spiritual force, the area behind the inscription formation enveloped by the inscription formation rose with waves of scorching flames once again. Duan Lingtian continued to fly forward at full speed, and soon, he saw the flashing violet lightning in front of him. It was the inscription formation that was constructed from origin stones and thunder concept fragments. This Skywolf Fort is worthy of being called a foreign lands force. It's really extravagant. Up until now, 3 concept fragments have appeared in this tunnel of mine. Unfortunately, my spiritual force is limited now, and I'm in a hurry. Otherwise, I'd definitely pry away all these concept fragments. Duan Lingtian's spiritual force extended out once again and fused into the inscription formation that was mainly formed from origin stones and thunder concept fragments, and he temporarily shut it off. Whoosh! In the next moment, Duan Lingtian passed through the area enveloped by the violet lightning, and continued to fly forward. When Duan Lingtian withdrew his spiritual force, he could clearly hear the waves of ear-piercing thunderclaps behind him, and the thunderclaps grew further and further away before quickly vanishing from his ears. Chapter 804. Right when Duan Lingtian was preparing to receive the earthen energy, he strangely noticed that an aged figure had suddenly appeared ahead of him. When he looked carefully, the owner of this figure was actually the vice fort master of Skywolf Fort, Ning Kan. Presently, Ning Kan stood there and was looking at Duan Lingtian with an amiable expression, and it was as if he was looking at a junior that he doted on dearly. Congratulations, you're the first to complete the first phase of the selections in the illusory crypt. Now you can choose one of the 3 rewards. After Duan Lingtian stopped, Ning Kan said with a light smile, the first is a grade 3 spirit weapon. The second is... Swoosh! Ning Kan hadn't finished speaking when Duan Lingtian's expression went grim, and then he flew out to actually pass through Ning Kan's body and continue flashing forward. At the same time, Ning Kan's body gradually dispersed as if he'd never appeared. Damn it! In the beginning, I actually didn't notice that it was an illusory realm formed from an inscription formation. The expression of Duan Lingtian, who continued flashing forward, sank slightly. At this moment, he didn't dare dally any longer and hurriedly stretched out his spiritual force, and as he moved forward, he didn't forget to search every single corner that he passed. Earlier, his thoughts were placed on the earthen energy, and he utterly didn't think about anything else. When Ning Kan appeared before him, it even caused him to be unable to refrain from being stunned. Logically speaking, it was impossible for Ning Kan to appear here. After all, Ning Kan had clearly spoken of the rules of the second round of the selections outside, and there wasn't a segment where the rewards would be distributed halfway. So when Duan Lingtian stopped for a moment, he completely reacted to the fact that it was an illusory realm formed from an inscription formation, and it was only for the sake of confusing him and delaying his time. Never mind. Even though I've wasted some time, but I'm afraid anyone would be fooled by that scene from before. I was fooled, and the others ought to be more or less the same. Duan Lingtian ceaselessly consoled himself, and he still felt that he ought to be able to be the first to arrive at the end of the illusory crypt and obtain the number 1 token. After flying forward for a while, Duan Lingtian's spiritual force trembled, and it caused his brows to be unable to refrain from raising as he sneered. An inscription formation again. After a short moment, Duan Lingtian's spiritual force temporarily shut down the inscription formation he'd just noticed. Another inscription formation that can construct an illusory realm. When his spiritual force fused into the inscription formation, Duan Lingtian was able to notice the exact effects of the formation at the first possible moment. As long as someone entered this kind of inscription formation, it would immediately trigger the illusory realm. At this moment, Duan Lingtian used his spiritual energy to temporarily shut off the inscription formation, so he did not have to face the unknown illusory realm. Duan Lingtian for me. Duan Lingtian to the Lingtian to Lingtian. Duan Lingtian took a deep breath and continued to fly forward at full speed. Subsequently, he detected a few inscription formations that could construct an illusory realm in advance, and he temporarily shut them off in advance, saving him a great deal of time. Perhaps my speed is inferior to those young geniuses at the 3rd level of the void interpretation stage or above, but I have the assistance of my spiritual force in this illusory crypt, and I'm practically unobstructed. They ought to be slower than me. Duan Lingtian thought in his heart. Now I'm afraid only Zishang is capable of threatening me in the second round of the selections. Zishang. The corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth curled into a cold smile as he looked at the familiar face that had a strand of black-colored flame brand between his brows, and his gaze stared fixedly at this person that he'd been waiting for a long time. Meanwhile, Zishang had already arrived nearby the pile of command tokens, and his expression went grim when he saw a command token was missing. Where's the number 1 token? There's actually someone that's even faster than me? An aged, hoarse, and ghastly voice sounded out from Zishang's mouth, and it was filled with disbelief as if he didn't believe that someone was able to pass through the illusory crypt before him. At the first possible moment, Duan Lingtian was able to determine that the current Zishang was possessed by the soul of the expert that seemed to be Emperor Wu. Old fellow. Duan Lingtian sneered when he heard Zishang, and he completely exposed his figure that was concealed at the side of the exit that was covered in mist. At the same time, a stone tablet appeared in his hand, a broken stone tablet. The stone tablet was densely inscribed with complicated words that were difficult to understand, and it caused others to be unable to figure them out. Duan Lingtian's cold laughter had just finished resounding out when Zishang had already turned around, and his pair of lusterless eyes flashed with a trace of fear. It's actually you, kid. How could you possibly be faster than me? Chapter 805. Nothing's impossible. Duan Lingtian sneered as he raised his hand and swung up the broken stone tablet before smashing it towards Zishang. Swoosh! The broken stone tablet tore through the sky and instantly seemed as if it had eyes as it flashed directly towards Zishang, and an extremely great pressure enveloped down, causing Zishang's face to go pale. Kid, you win. An aged, hoarse, and ghastly voice sounded out hastily before being completely obliterated. At the same time, the strand of black-colored flame brand between Zishang's brows vanished, and his pair of lusterless eyes had spirit. Right at this moment, the broken stone tablet stopped not too far away from Zishang, and it seemed as if it had lost its target. Old fellow, you fled really quickly. Duan Lingtian's figure flashed out to instantly arrive before the broken stone tablet, the Devil Seal tablet, and then he raised his hand to grab the Devil Seal tablet. But so long as Zishang himself dies, you won't be able to survive as well. Duan Lingtian looked at Zishang with eyes that were filled with extreme killing intent. On the other hand, Zishang's eyes were similarly filled with killing intent when he looked at Duan Lingtian. Of course, there was also traces of fear that came from the bottom of his heart and soul mixed within. Without Elder Ghost possessing him, he knew that he was far from being a match for Duan Lingtian. Duan Lingtian, you want to kill me? Zishang asked with a low voice. You already know the answer. Duan Lingtian sneered as the origin energy on his body swelled along with this, and it instantly transformed into waves of piercingly cold strong winds that fused into the Devil Seal tablet in his hand and emitted waves of terrifying aura. Swoosh! At practically the instant Duan Lingtian finished speaking, Zishang flew up into the sky and shouted out explosively at the same time. Vice Fort Master Feng, save me! Zishang's voice contained origin energy that was transmitted out, and it was like a thunderclap reverberating in the ears of others. Vice Fort Master Feng? Duan Lingtian, who held the Devil Seal tablet, was first stunned, and then he couldn't help but recall that he seemed to have seen Lu Yong enter the inner fort with Zishang yesterday. Could it be that Zishang entered the inner fort to meet the Vice Fort Master of Skywolf Fort, Feng Wei? Thinking of this, Duan Lingtian's eyes turned cold. Without any hesitation, he flew towards Zishang. He wanted to kill this Zishang before Feng Wei interfered so as to avoid future troubles. Whirlwind. Duan Lingtian's speed was extremely swift. For the sake of avoiding exposing the Devil Seal tablet before Feng Wei, he'd put it away halfway, and his eyes flickered with a dim light. 1,000 illusions. Without any hesitation, Duan Lingtian's spiritual power fused with the spiritual imprint in the depths of his soul and unleashed his exclusive soul skill. An illusory space appeared out of thin air and swept towards Zishang, completely enveloping him. In front of Duan Lingtian, Zishang was like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered by Duan Lingtian. Die! Duan Lingtian flashed to arrive before Zishang, and then he raised his hand and slashed down towards Zishang's head. When he saw Zishang's head was about to be slashed open like a watermelon, Duan Lingtian's face suddenly went grim because a terrifying aura had suddenly skyrocketed from Zishang's body. Moreover, the illusory space he created with his soul skill, 1,000 illusions, shattered in an instant. Swoosh! Zishang's figure flashed out to easily avoid Duan Lingtian's palm strike, and then he stood in the distance and silently stared at Duan Lingtian. Old fellow, looks like you're really unafraid of death. When he saw the black-colored flame brand that appeared between Zishang's brows, Duan Lingtian already knew what had happened. It was precisely the incomplete soul that was suspected to be Emperor Wu within Zishang's body, and it had occupied Zishang's body at the instant Zishang was about to be killed by him. Not only had it occupied Zishang's body, it even shattered the illusory space he created with his soul skill, 1,000 illusions, and it even helped Zishang avoid calamity. Kid, if you want to kill Zishang, you'll have to pass through me first. Zishang, who was temporarily possessed by Elder Ghost, laughed evilly. You're courting death. Duan Lingtian's face sank, and he raised his hand to withdraw the Devil Seal tablet. The Devil Seal tablet seemed to have noticed something, and it flew towards Zishang on its own. Just as the Devil Seal tablet was about to smash onto Zishang, the black-colored flame brand between Zishang's brows vanished, and the Devil Seal tablet stopped in midair. Zishang, let me see if that old fellow can still save you this time. This time, for the sake of preventing that old fellow from possessing Zishang's body to save Zishang, Duan Lingtian didn't put away the Devil Seal tablet again. 1,000 illusions. Subsequently, a dim light flickered within Duan Lingtian's eyes, and he executed his exclusive soul skill once more. Instantly, Zishang was enveloped by the illusory space once more. Die! Duan Lingtian's gaze went slightly cold, and he raised the Devil Seal tablet and smashed it towards Zishang's head. He wanted to see if that old fellow still dared to come out. Once he did, he'd definitely make him and Zishang perish together. Humph! When the Devil Seal tablet in Duan Lingtian's hand was about to smash Duan Lingtian to death, a cold grunt entered into Duan Lingtian's ears. Along with this was a shapeless enormous force. Bang! The terrifying enormous force swept over and blasted Duan Lingtian flying, causing the piercingly cold strong winds that coiled around Duan Lingtian's body to shatter into pieces, and the sheen on the Devil Seal tablet in his hand dimmed down along with this. Whoosh! 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 When Duan Lingtian returned to his senses, he noticed that 4 figures had flashed in successively from the exit, and it was precisely Feng Wei, Ning Can, Sword 13 and Saber 5. The person that made a move earlier was precisely Feng Wei who'd arrived first. Feng Wei, what's the meaning of this? The martial competition of the 10 dynasties was held by your Skywolf Fort. As the dignified Vice Fort Master of Skywolf Fort, aren't you going a bit too far by violating the rules and interfering in the martial competition? When Sword 13 entered, he just happened to see the scene of Duan Lingtian being blasted flying by Feng Wei, and his face instantly sank as he spoke with a cold voice. Waves of sword insight that shot into the sky abruptly swept out from his body, and his entire body seemed to have transformed into a sword that was prepared to whistle out at any moment to annihilate Feng Wei. A mere 7th-level Void Transformation Stage martial artist like you dares to be arrogant before a 9th-level Void Transformation Stage martial artist? Needless to say, your courage is worthy of praise. Saber 5, who'd always stood silently at the side, glanced at Feng Wei with disdain, and he seemed to be ridiculing Feng Wei for overestimating his ability. 9th level of the Void Transformation Stage. Saber 5's words caused Feng Wei to be unable to refrain from shuddering, and he revealed an expression of disbelief when he looked at Sword 13 once more. How could this be possible? How could you, Sword 13, possibly break through to that level so quickly? 9th level of the Void Transformation Stage. Feng Wei was naturally clearly aware of what these 5 short words meant. In Cloud Continent, beneath the unfathomable martial monarch stage, the martial artist with the highest cultivation was a 9th level Void Transformation Stage martial artist. 9th level Void Transformation Stage? Duan Lingtian was stunned for a time when he heard Saber 5. Sword 13, Su Li's master, was actually a 9th level Void Transformation Stage expert? That was a formidable existence that was the closest to the martial monarch stage. Duan Lingtian, who possessed the memories of 2 lifetimes of Samsara Emperor Wu, naturally knew of the existence of the 9th level Void Transformation Stage and the meaning it represented, and he knew that it was the strongest expert in the Void Stage. The Void Stage was divided into 4 levels: Void Prying, Void Initiation, Void Interpretation, and Void Transformation, whereas the 9th level Void Transformation Stage originated from the 4 Great Void Stages, and it stood at the peak of the 4 Great Void Stages. Chapter 806. When they saw Sword 13 reveal a cultivation at the 9th level of the Void Transformation stage, Ning Can and Feng Wei, the two Vice Fort Masters of Skywolf Fort, had fearful expressions as if they were facing a dreadful beast. Sword 13, since you're already a 9th level Void Transformation stage expert, the two of us know that we're not a match for you. But the rules of the second round of the selections today were agreed upon since the beginning, and it's only for the sake of seizing the number tokens to carry out the ranking. Ning Can took a deep breath and said frankly, these rules were set by the Lord Fort Master. If you have any doubts, you can follow me to see the Lord Fort Master for confirmation. The Lord Fort Master Ning Can spoke of was precisely the highest leader that commanded the entire Skywolf Fort, the elusive Fort Master of Skywolf Fort. After Ning Can mentioned the Fort Master of Skywolf Fort, slight fear flashed past Sword 13's eyes, and then he grunted coldly in the end and didn't say anything further. Even though he wasn't afraid of the two Vice Fort Masters of Skywolf Fort before him, he had no choice but to be extremely fearful of the Fort Master of Skywolf Fort. The Fort Master of Skywolf Fort had been famous for many years, and even if Sword 13's cultivation had broken through to the 9th level of the Void Transformation stage now, he knew that he wasn't a match for the Fort Master. Duanling, then let's go. Sword 13 paid no further attention to Ning Can and Feng Wei, and he spoke to Duanling Tian. Duanling Tian nodded. At the same time that he left with Sword 13, he didn't forget to put away the Devil Seal tablet in his hand, and at the same time, he fiercely glanced at Zishang who stood nearby. When Feng Wei rushed over in time, he knew that it was impossible for him to kill Zishang. No matter how unwilling he was, he had no other choice. No matter what, this was Skywolf Fort, and Feng Wei was the Vice Fort Master of Skywolf Fort. Moreover, the rules of the second round of the selections did indeed not state that one could kill, so Feng Wei's interference couldn't be considered to have broken the rules. If I knew earlier, I wouldn't have put away the Devil Seal tablet the first time I attacked earlier. Thinking about what had just happened, Duanling Tian felt a wave of regret. When he made a move against Zishang for the first time, Zishang had hastily cried for help from Feng Wei, whereas he was worried that Feng Wei would notice the Devil Seal tablet in his hand, so he put it away at the first possible moment. At that time, he was in a hurry to kill Zishang, and for a moment, he forgot that there was a remnant soul that seemed to belong to Emperor Wu within Zishang's body, allowing Zishang to escape calamity under his soul skill, Thousand Illusions. When he recovered from his shock and realized his mistake, he withdrew the Devil Seal tablet once more, and intended to use the Devil Seal tablet to blast Zishang to death. Feng Wei had come, forced him to retreat, and saved Zishang. One wrong step leads to many wrong steps. Duanling Tian sighed. He originally had the opportunity to kill Zishang today, but because of a momentary lapse in judgment, Zishang had luckily escaped calamity. Of course, Duanling Tian also understood that at this point, it was useless to think about it any further. In this world, there was no medicine for regret. What he had to do now was to not make another mistake when the next opportunity arrived, and strive to kill Zishang at the first possible moment. His heart couldn't be at ease until Zishang died. All in all, my current strength is still too weak. If I possessed a strength that surpassed Skywolf Fort, then not to mention Feng Wei and Ning Can, these two Vice Fort Masters of Skywolf Fort, even if the Fort Master of Skywolf Fort personally made a move against me, I would similarly not be afraid, and I would be entirely capable of killing Zishang right before his eyes. Duanling Tian realized once again that his strength was still too weak. Now, he didn't compare himself with the younger generation but Feng Wei, Ning Can, and the other experts of the older generation instead. Strength, I need a formidable strength. Duanling Tian shouted ceaselessly in his heart, whereas the origin energy in his body seemed to have heard his soundless shouts, and it completely seethed as if it had transformed into numerous furious dragons that flashed through the meridians in his body. At the same time, the medicinal strength of the rebirth pill that was originally accumulated in the depths of his dantian fused a step further into his origin energy. At this instant, Duanling Tian felt his entire body was filled with strength, and he'd taken another great step towards the third level of the void interpretation stage, and it was even to the extent that he'd arrived at the bottleneck. So long as I charge through the bottleneck, I'll be able to officially step into the third level of the void interpretation stage. Duanling Tian's eyes flashed like two dazzling stars that flickered. Before leaving the illusory crypt, Duan Lingtian didn't forget to glance coldly at Zishang. The day would come when he completely annihilated Zishang, and he would use the Devil Seal tablet to crush the incomplete soul that was suspected to be Emperor Wu that was concealed within Zishang's body. He wasn't afraid of Zishang in the slightest. He was afraid of the incomplete soul that was suspected to be Emperor Wu that was concealed within Zishang's body, and that was the greatest threat. Duan Lingtian, I'll make you die a graveless death. Right at this moment, Zishang's voice transmission that was filled with blood and ruthlessness sounded out by Duan Lingtian's ears, and it seemed as if he wished for nothing more than to tear Duan Lingtian into pieces before burning his bones and scattering his ashes. Then let's see who dies first. A wisp of disdain appeared on the corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth as he replied indifferently to Zishang, and then he followed behind Sword 13 and Saber 5 to pass through the mist at the exit of the illusory crypt to return to the combat arena in the outer fort of Skywolf Fort. As soon as he left, Duan Lingtian noticed numerous burning gazes descending onto him, and these gazes contained admiration, disbelief, and disbelief. A variety of emotions represented the feelings of the representatives of the various dynasties in the sky above the combat arena at this moment. It's actually him. How could it possibly be him? He's only 28 years old. The first to leave the illusory crypt at the age of 28? Even though I feel it's unbelievable as well, the facts prove that he's indeed the first to leave. The number 1 token has most probably fallen into his hands. He probably used some sort of special method to take a shortcut. Otherwise, it's impossible for him to leave the illusory crypt so quickly. 28 years old, he's at most at the first level of the void interpretation stage, and he might not even have broken through to the void interpretation stage. Besides the representatives of the Dark Han dynasty and Darming dynasty, the representatives of the other 8 dynasties discussed animatedly, and all of them revealed doubtful expressions. Obviously, they didn't believe that Duan Lingtian possessed the strength to be the first to pass through the illusory crypt. Duan Lingtian is actually the first to leave. The Dark Han dynasty's emperor's eyes lit up as he hurriedly sent a voice transmission into Duan Lingtian's ears. Duan Lingtian, congratulations on being the first to pass through the illusory crypt. Have you obtained the number 1 token? Duan Lingtian raised his head to glance at the Dark Han dynasty's emperor when he heard the voice, and then he nodded indifferently. Haha, good. The Dark Han dynasty's emperor laughed, and he laughed extremely brilliantly. At the same time, the gaze he shot at the representatives of the other 9 dynasties had undergone a change, and it was filled with complacency as if he was saying, "See that? This is the young expert of our Dark Han dynasty." Bai Nan-yin, Zishang's master, glanced at Duan Lingtian with a complicated gaze, and he couldn't help but break out in cold sweat for Zishang in his heart. He was clearly aware of the conflict between Duan Lingtian and his disciple, Zishang, and it was a conflict that couldn't be resolved and wouldn't end until one of them was dead. No wonder even Wei lost at his hands. This Duan Lingtian is indeed extraordinary. The representative of the Darming dynasty, the expert from the Darming dynasty's Zhao clan, Elder Qian, looked at Duan Lingtian with a gaze filled with astonishment. Duan Lingtian wasn't unfamiliar to him. It was even to the extent that a few months ago, when he was still in the capital of the Darming dynasty, he'd heard that there was a young man that could easily defeat the strongest expert in the younger generation of their Zhao clan. When he arrived at the Zhao clan's Skywolf Fort and saw this young man for the first time, he felt shock that came from the bottom of his heart. Never had he imagined that this person would actually be so young. I originally thought that the first to pass through the illusory crypt would be the Crown Prince. I never imagined that it would instead be this Duan Lingtian. Elder Qian sighed in his heart. After leaving the illusory crypt, Duan Lingtian, who'd become the center of attention, silently stood in midair with Sword 13 and Saber 5. You passed through the illusory crypt long ago and obtained the number 1 token? Sword 13 glanced at Duan Lingtian and asked. Yes. Duan Lingtian nodded. So in this way, the reason you didn't come out at the first possible moment was because you were waiting for Zishang? How long did you wait for him? Saber 5's pupils constricted as he asked with surprise. I waited for around 50 or 60 breaths of time. Duan Lingtian said. 50 or 60 breaths of time. Sword 13 and Saber 5 couldn't help but glance at each other when they heard Duan Lingtian. and they saw astonishment in each other's eyes. There was only a single thought left in their hearts. Freak. This Duan Lingtian was simply a freak. Junior brother Sword. This little fellow must be pulled into our blade sect no matter what. Saber 5 looked at Sword 13 and spoke with a serious expression. Even though he usually didn't get along well with Sword 13, and it was even to the extent that he refused to accept Sword 13 in many aspects, but that was only a private matter between them. Once it was related to the Blade Sect, he would instead stand on the same side as Sword 13 and stand united against outsiders. I understand. Sword 13 nodded. Duan Lingtian naturally didn't know about the voice transmission between Sword 13 and Saber 5. Presently, he was holding the wind concept fragment in his hand and comprehending wind concept in meditation. Not only that, he'd even closed his eyes and sat cross-legged in midair while cultivating seriously. 9 dragons wore sovereign technique, sword dragon form. The origin energy in Duan Lingtian's body became restless once more along with him starting to cultivate, and it ceaselessly circulated according to the mental cultivation method of the sword dragon form before charging towards the bottleneck that led to the 3rd level of the void interpretation stage. So long as I break through the bottleneck, I'll be able to smoothly break through to the 3rd level of the void interpretation stage. After the incident from before, Duan Lingtian was filled with yearning towards formidable strength, and he urgently wanted to improve his cultivation at the fastest speed possible. Vice Fort Master Ning has come out. At the same time, someone shouted out, causing the gazes of the representatives of the various dynasties in the sky above the combat arena to move towards the exit of the illusory crypt. Even though these people were puzzled by the actions of Feng Wei, Ning Can, Sword 13, and Saber 5 that had successively entered the exit of the illusory crypt, they didn't know what had happened. Earlier, even though Zishang's cry for help was loud, yet it was mostly filtered out by the inscription formation at the exit of the illusory crypt, causing it to become like the sound of a mosquito. Chapter 807. Vice Fort Master Feng. In next to no time, the representatives of the various dynasties saw that after the Vice Fort Master of Skywolf Fort, Ning Can, the other Vice Fort Master of Skywolf Fort, Feng Wei, had followed him out. It wasn't just that, there was another person behind Feng Wei. It's him. He seems to be a young genius of the Dark Han dynasty as well? My God. The first 2 people to come out of the second round of the selections are actually members of the Dark Han dynasty. Instantly, the representatives of the other 9 dynasties were in an uproar, and all of them stared fixedly at Zishang as if they wanted to discern something from Zishang. Ha ha ha. Good. The Dark Han dynasty's emperor laughed heartily, and his laughter was filled with delight. Never had he imagined that after Duan Lingtian, the second person to come out of the illusory crypt would be Zishang. Even though Zishang wasn't related by blood to the Dark Han dynasty's imperial family, he was the personal disciple of his imperial uncle, Bai Nan Yin. Most importantly, Zishang was representing the Dark Han dynasty to participate in the martial competition of the 10 dynasties. Bai Nan Yin's eyes emitted bright lights as his body trembled slightly from excitement. Never had he imagined that his disciple would actually be the second to walk out of the illusory crypt. After Zishang came out, he couldn't help but reveal slight complacency when he noticed the numerous gazes converging onto him. But when his gaze saw the violet-clothed young man that sat cross-legged in the distant sky and cultivated, his pupils couldn't help but constrict abruptly, and cold lights flickered within them. Duan Lingtian. Zishang gnashed his teeth slightly as he stared at Duan Lingtian from afar. Even though obtaining the number 2 token caused Zishang to be rather delighted, but when he thought of how the person that obtained the number 1 token was Duan Lingtian, he felt a wave of displeasure in his heart. No matter who surpassed him, he wasn't willing to be surpassed by Duan Lingtian. To him, being surpassed by Duan Lingtian was a humiliation that was impossible to wash away. Zishang, have you obtained the number 2 token? The Dark Han dynasty's emperor and Zishang's master, Bai Nan Yin, asked Zishang via voice transmission at practically the exact same time. Yes. Zishang flew out and arrived beside the 2 in a moment. He nodded slightly. When the 2 saw this, they immediately beamed with joy. Uncle, you've accepted a good disciple. The Dark Han dynasty's emperor smiled as he looked at Bai Nan Yin. Bai Nanin laughed heartily. He was so happy that his eyes narrowed. To have such a direct disciple in this life, what more could he ask for? Zishang, I've decided to confer upon your father the title of Dark Han Dynasty's king with a different surname. Moreover, I'll bring your Z clan to the capital of my Dark Han dynasty. What do you think? The Dark Han dynasty's emperor said to Zishang. Thank you, your majesty. Zishang nodded faintly and remained calm. I hope that when your strength reaches the heavens in the future, you won't forget about my Dark Han dynasty. The emperor smiled. Yes. Zishang nodded again. Suddenly, purple disease. The gaze of Ningqian, that was the first to soar into the sky, descended onto Zishang, and then he smiled amiably. Are you willing to take me as your master and become my personal disciple? After failing to take a disciple yesterday, Ningqian had once again taken the initiative to take a disciple. The target this time was still a young genius of the Dark Han dynasty. Yet it wasn't Duan Lingtian but Zishang. Whoosh! Ningqian's words of taking a disciple drew the gazes of all the representatives of the 10 dynasties, and most of them revealed envious expressions as they looked at Zishang. They knew that because Zishang was the second to walk out of the illusory crypt, he'd obtained sufficient importance from Ningqian. He wouldn't be like Duan Lingtian and directly refuse Vice Fort Master Ning, right? He probably won't. He and Duan Lingtian are both young geniuses of the Dark Han dynasty. He wouldn't really make the same decision as Duan Lingtian, right? Many representatives discussed animatedly. Zishang quickly agreed. The eyes of the Dark Han dynasty's emperor and Bai Nanin lit up when they heard Ningqian, and they hurriedly urged Zishang. They were worried that Zishang would be hot-headed and refuse Vice Fort Master Ning like Duan Lingtian. As far as they were concerned, this was a good opportunity for the Dark Han dynasty to form a relationship with the Skywolf Fort, and perhaps it would even allow the Dark Han dynasty to obtain the protection of the Skywolf Fort because of this. When a man achieves the Tao, even his friends and family can ascend to the heavens. Nothing was better than this. I agree. Zishang flew out and knelt before Ningqian before kowtowing to take Ningqian as his master, and he seemed to be respectful and humble. Even though Zishang had the incomplete soul of an expert that was suspected to be Emperor Wu within his body, he didn't possess a lofty and unyielding character like Duan Lingtian. So long as it was something of value to him, he wouldn't let go of it. As for taking a master, it was only a formality to him. Even if Ningqian became his master, once a conflict of interest arose between them in the future, he wouldn't hold back because Ningqian was his master, and he would only think of a way to kill Ningqian at the first possible moment. Yes, he heard this. His master was only a stepping stone, an inconspicuous stepping stone on his path to the future. Of course, Ningqian didn't know what Zishang was thinking in his heart, otherwise, he would probably be angered to the point of killing Zishang with a single strike. Good. Ningqian laughed heartily, and then he asked, what concept have you comprehended? When Ningqian asked this, the representatives of the various dynasties knew what he wanted to do next, and all of them revealed envious gazes as they looked at Zishang. Amongst them included the Dark Han dynasty's emperor and Bai Nanin. They knew that Ningqian intended to reward Zishang with a soul fragment. Master, I've comprehended the two concepts of wind and fire. Zishang's gaze flickered, and even his breathing became slightly hurried. Even though the incomplete soul of an expert was concealed within his body. But besides guiding him to cultivate and passing down some techniques to swiftly comprehend concept to him, that expert was unable to give him anything material. For example, high-grade spirit weapons, spirit herbs, and concept fragments were all things that the expert was unable to give him. As far as Zishang was concerned, so long as he obtained a concept fragment and combined it with the technique of comprehending concept that Elder Ghost passed down to him, his concept would surely improve by leaps and bounds. Master just happens to have an 8th level fire concept fragment in his possession. I'll give it to you. There's also this 6th level wind concept fragment. With a raise of his hand, a red and green fragment flashed out, and it arrived in Zishang's hand in a short moment. 8th level fire concept fragment. Zishang's eyes lit up as he never imagined that the 8th level fire concept fragment that belonged to Ningqian that he heard from Lu Yong yesterday would so easily arrive in his possession. Besides that, there was also a 6th level wind concept fragment. At this moment, including the representatives of the Dark Han dynasty, the representatives of the other 9 dynasties were shocked. 8th level Fire Concept Fragment? 6th level Wind Concept Fragment? Vice Fort Master Ning is so generous. When compared to Zishang's, the gains of the Darming dynasty's Liu Yong yesterday are simply like the difference between the heavens and the earth. The representatives of the various dynasties exclaimed with admiration. In next to no time, they shut their mouths because they noticed that Feng Wei's fierce gaze was flashing past them one by one. Only now did they recall that speaking like this was undoubtedly indirectly showing that Vice Fort Master Feng was stingy, and they instantly shut their mouths and didn't dare speak another word. Junior brother Zishang were senior brothers in the future. Feng Wei looked at Zishang and greeted him with a smile. Senior brother Feng Wei. Zishang returned the greeting with a smile, and at the same time, he glanced complacently at Duan Lingtian, who sat cross-legged in the distant sky, and he seemed as if he was flaunting his current noble identity. But unfortunately, Duan Lingtian was cultivating and utterly didn't open his eyes to look at Zishang, not even a single glance. Congratulations to Vice Fort Master Ning for obtaining an outstanding disciple. Congratulations, Vice Fort Master Ning. Instantly, besides Sword 13 Saber 5, Feng Wu Dao, and Duan Lingtian, who sat cross-legged and cultivated, the group of people in the sky above the combat arena congratulated Ning Can successively. Ning Can's face was filled with smiles, and his gaze quickly descended onto the Dark Han dynasty's emperor. At the bottom of it all, it's all thanks to your Dark Han dynasty that Zishang and I have the fate of being master and disciple. Take these 3 soul fragments as a gift of thanks. As soon as Ning Can finished speaking, 3 concept fragments appeared in his hand, and he tossed them to the Dark Han dynasty's emperor. Thank you, Vice Fort Master Ning. The Dark Han dynasty's emperor stretched out his hand to receive the 3 concept fragments, and he was extremely excited. At the same time, he satisfactorily enjoyed the numerous gazes that were filled with envy and jealousy from the surroundings. Whoosh! Suddenly, a gust of violent wind swept over abruptly, and it blew to the point the clothes of everyone in the sky above the combat arena fluttered with the wind, causing many people to look over. Where's the wind coming from? This violent wind came strangely, and many people looked towards the direction the violent wind blew from. A violet-clothed young man sat cross-legged there, and the violet-clothed young man's body was completely coiled by strands of material wind concept. Second-level intermediate wind concept. The phenomenon of the heavens and the earth in the sky caused many people to exclaim in a low voice. At this moment, 30 lifelike ancient horned dragon silhouettes coiled down from the sky above the violet-clothed young man. Duan Lingtian. Zishang looked over as well, and he gnashed his teeth with hatred. The violet-clothed young man was precisely Duan Lingtian, and he just comprehended second-level intermediate wind concept. Along with the material wind concept dispersing around his body, Duan Lingtian didn't have the slightest intention of waking up, and he continued to close his eyes and sit cross-legged in the sky as he cultivated. What a kid! Feng Wu Dao's eyes lit up. He knew of Duan Lingtian's advancement in wind concept, but never had he imagined that Duan Lingtian would break through in such a short period of time, comprehending second-level void interpretation concept at the mere age of 28. This Duan Lingtian's comprehension ability can be said to be monstrous. A representative from an unknown dynasty sighed. His words obtained the agreement of many people. Ning Can grunted with a voice that only he could hear, and his gaze that was icy cold like a blade swept towards Duan Lingtian. If it wasn't for him being afraid of losing his status, if it wasn't for him being afraid of Sword 13, he would wish for nothing more than to directly make a move and hack this kid that caused him to lose face completely yesterday into 1,000 pieces. Duan Lingtian. Even if you're able to luckily survive the martial competition of the 10 dynasties this time, you won't be able to jump around for long after it ends. Chapter 808. He just comprehended second-level void interpretation concept? After Sword 13 and Saber 5 found out from Feng Wu Dao that Duan Lingtian had just comprehended second-level intermediate wind concept, they were greatly shocked. When they saw Duan Lingtian being the first to leave the illusory crypt, They originally thought that Duan Lingtian's strength could be considered to be at the top amongst the young geniuses of the various dynasties that were participating in the martial competition of the 10 dynasties this time. But never had they imagined that Duan Lingtian had actually just comprehended second-level void interpretation concept. Moreover, Sword 13 found out from Su Li that Duan Lingtian seemed to only be a second-level void interpretation stage martial artist. In other words, Duan Lingtian had relied on a cultivation at the second level of the void interpretation stage, and first-level void interpretation concept to be the first to leave the illusory crypt. For a time he felt extremely shocked. Looks like it's just as Su Li said. Duan Lingtian really can't be judged by convention. Sword 13 thought in his heart. At the same time, the gaze he shot at Duan Lingtian grew even more dazzling and bright. This is a monster, a peerless monster. Duan Lingtian, who'd become the center of attention, was still cultivating there with his eyes closed, and he was completely unaware of everything that had occurred outside. Presently, besides holding a wind concept fragment in his hand and comprehending wind concept, he was also ceaselessly cultivating the 7th form of the 9 Dragons War Sovereign technique, the Sword Dragon form. In his body, the origin energy roiled like tempestuous waves that charged out over and over again, with the intention of charging through the final bottleneck of the second-level void interpretation stage. So long as he charged through this bottleneck, his cultivation would advance a step further, and smoothly break through to the 3rd level of the void interpretation stage. Whoosh! Suddenly, a wave of wind howls sounded out from the exit of the illusory crypt, and it caused everyone besides Duan Lingtian to look over. At that place, a black-clothed young man soared into the sky, and his face that was sharp like a blade was obviously filled with slight disbelief. After he came out, his dense brows raised as his fierce gaze flashed out, and he completely disregarded the numerous burning gazes in the sky above the combat arena as he started to sweep past everyone in the sky above the combat arena. In the end, his gaze locked onto Zishang and Duan Lingtian. Tokens 1 and 2 were taken by them? The black-clothed young man muttered. This Darkhan dynasty is really filled with hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the black-clothed young man stepped into the air and quickly arrived in front of an old man and an old woman. The old man and old woman beamed with joy. They are from the Great Qi dynasty. I have an impression of this person. He's the 9th prince of the Darky dynasty's imperial family, Qi Feng. But even though he's famous in the Darky dynasty, he isn't as conspicuous as the others. Why would he be the first to leave the illusory crypt this time? Some of the people who recognized the black-clothed youth couldn't help but whisper to each other. The black-clothed young man was close to middle age. He had thick eyebrows and large eyes. His chiseled face left a deep impression on people. He gave people a feeling of unyielding steel. Especially his pair of sharp eyes, which left a deep impression on people. The 2 vice fort masters of Skywolf Fort glanced indifferently at Qi Feng before withdrawing their gazes. Qi Feng was able to be the 3rd to walk out of the illusory crypt, so he undoubtedly possessed shocking strength and ability. But they weren't surprised that Qi Feng possessed such accomplishments at such an old age. In Skywolf Fort, there were many disciples of the Skywolf Fort that possessed a cultivation at the 4th level of the void interpretation stage at Qi Feng's age. As for Sword 13 and Saber 5, only Saber 5 had glanced at Qi Feng when he first came out, and he didn't look at Qi Feng again after that. His thoughts were similar to Ning Can and Feng Wei. Even if he possessed a cultivation at the 4th level of the void interpretation stage at such an age, it wasn't surprising. Duan Lingtian. Qi Feng's gaze descended onto the violet-colored figure that sat cross-legged in the distant sky, and the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. Truly interesting. He's only 28 years old, yet he's the first to come out of the illusory crypt. The number 1 token ought to be in his possession. I really look forward to the battle with him in the future. I want to see if he relied on luck or strength to arrive at this step. Qi Feng's eyes were filled with dense battle intent. Humph. Zishang instantly grunted with dissatisfaction when he saw Qi Feng had only glanced at him when he came out before completely disregarding him and placing his gaze on Duan Lingtian. And he instantly grunted with dissatisfaction. Qi Feng glanced indifferently at Zishang when he heard this voice, and then he withdrew his gaze before standing in midair before the old man and old woman before closing his eyes to rest. After 5 breaths of time, whoosh! Another figure soared up into the sky from the illusory crypt, and it successfully drew the gazes of the representatives of the various dynasties. This was a red-clothed young man with a cold expression, and he was still composed when facing the numerous burning gazes that descended from the sky, and he stood by the side of a middle-aged man and an old man with composure. It's a member of the Darqin dynasty. This person is called Qin Kong, and he's the widely rumored #1 expert in the younger generation of the Darqin dynasty. Supposedly, this Qin Kong had already stepped into the second level of the void interpretation stage 3 or 4 years ago, and he's at least at the third level of the void interpretation stage now, or even the fourth level of the void interpretation stage. The Darqin dynasty is one of the dynasties with the longest history amongst our 10 dynasties, and its hidden resources and reserves are shocking. The representatives of the various dynasties discussed animatedly. Qin Kong's age seemed to be similar to Qifeng, and both of them were almost middle-aged, so he didn't draw too much attention from Sword 13, Saber 5, Ningcan, and Feng Wei. After Qin Kong stood in midair, he glanced at Duan Lingtian and Zishang with an emotionless expression, and he seemed to be calm. But so long as there was a discerning person present, the person would be able to discern with a single glance that the depths of Qin Kong's gaze wasn't calm. Qifeng. Qin Kong suddenly looked at the Darqi dynasty's Qifeng, the young expert that came out of the illusory crypt before him. I lost to you the last time. This time, I'll surely wash away my humiliation. Whoosh! As soon as Qin Kong spoke, the scene was in an uproar. So it turned out that Qin Kong had once lost to Qifeng. Qifeng wasn't afraid in the slightest as he met Qin Kong's gaze, and then he smiled lightly. I'm afraid you don't have the chance. You came out an entire 5 breaths of time later than me. 5 breaths of time was neither long nor short, but it also showed that the gap between him and Qin Kong wasn't so easily closed. Qin Kong laughed with ridicule when he heard Qifeng. The ranking in the second round of the selections is only a temporary ranking, and it's nothing, unless you admit that your strength is far inferior to those 2 from the Darqin dynasty. I heard that one of those 2 from the Darqin dynasty came out an entire 15 breaths of time earlier than you, whereas the other one came out 10 breaths of time earlier than you. Qin Kong spoke frankly. Qifeng was stunned and didn't know what to say for a time. He was naturally unwilling to admit that he was weaker than the Darqin dynasty's Duan Lingtian and Zishang. Not to mention the Duan Lingtian was more than 10 years younger than him, even Zishang was 6 or 7 years younger than him. It wasn't impossible for him to admit that 2 young men that were so much younger than him were stronger than him, unless they were able to defeat him in a head-on battle. Otherwise, he would absolutely not admit it. In this way, you're the same as me, and you're rather dissatisfied with the outcome of the second round of the selections. Qin Kong grunted and didn't speak further, and he stood there with a cold expression. Yet his gaze never left the violet-colored figure in the distance. Even though he wasn't willing to admit that this violet-clothed young man that had obtained the #1 token was stronger than him, since the violet-clothed young man was able to pass through the illusory crypt first, there was undoubtedly something extraordinary about the violet-clothed young man. I really look forward to fighting you, Qin Kong muttered. He practically had no opponents amongst the younger generation of the Darqin dynasty, and besides fighting for benefits for the Darqin dynasty, he'd come to the ancient desert city Skywolf Fort to participate in the martial competition of the 10 dynasties, this time mostly because he wanted to compete with the most outstanding young geniuses of the other 9 dynasties. Based on the current situation, there were indeed a few people that caused the hot blood in his body to burn and his battle intent to soar. Whoosh! Not long after, the mist at the exit of the illusory crypt roiled once more. The gazes of the representatives of the various dynasties that had experienced descended successively onto the exit, as they knew that someone would come out from within shortly. Could it be the personal disciple of Vice Fort Master Feng Lu Yong? Lu Yong, the Darming dynasty's crown prince. He's only around the age of 35, and his cultivation is at the 3rd level of the void interpretation stage. With the resources of Skywolf Fort, it ought to not be a problem for him to step into the 5th level of the void interpretation stage before the age of 40. But he's only at the 3rd level of the void interpretation stage now, and he's still at a disadvantage in terms of age when compared to the group of young geniuses of the various dynasties that are almost middle-aged. Many people discussed animatedly. It wasn't only the representatives of the various dynasties that were curious about who was about to come out, even the vice fort master of Skywolf Fort, Feng Wei, was similarly curious. Feng Wei's gaze locked onto the exit as he wanted to clearly see who was coming out at the first possible moment. In his heart, he naturally hoped that it was his personal disciple, Lu Yong, that would come out. In this way, he could be considered to have gained face for him. But unfortunately, in next to no time, the anticipation on his face froze because the person that soared up into the sky from the exit of the illusory crypt wasn't Lu Yong. Damn it! I've finally come out. The robust young man that was soaring up into the sky and looked to be slightly dignified cursed as soon as he came out. I'm a fucking genius. An absolute genius. How could someone possibly walk out of the illusory crypt before me? Cheating. They've surely cheated. After the robust young man cursed, his gaze flashed past Duan Lingtian, Zishang, Qi Feng, and Qin Kong as he spoke without the slightest fear. For a time, besides a robust old man that stood awkwardly in midair, the representatives of the 9 dynasties were all speechless. Where did this clown come from? Old fellow, I've come out. The robust young man seemed as if no one was present as he arrived before the robust old man. Yet he was still carefree and without the slightest scruples when facing a senior. The 5th has come out, what's there to be complacent about? The robust old man reprimanded with a stern expression. It's the members of the Daryuan dynasty. Everyone says that the Daryuan dynasty is filled with robust men. Now that I've seen it today, it really does deserve its reputation. Many people recognize the origins of the robust old man and robust young man. Hey! Vice Fort Master Ning, Vice Fort Master Feng. I reported the 4 of them for cheating. How could there possibly be someone that's more talented than me, Ta Mu? This is impossible. Chapter 809. How presumptuous! Ning Can's face sank when faced with Ta Mu's rudeness, and the imposing aura on his body stretched out to sweep towards Ta Mu, causing Ta Mu's expression to become extremely unsightly. Vice Fort Master Ning, please show mercy. Ta Mu doesn't have any ill intent, and he's just being unforgiving. The representative of the Daryuan dynasty, the robust old man, hurriedly pleaded for mercy for Ta Mu. Ning Can's expression eased up slightly when he heard the robust old man, and at the same time, he withdrew his imposing aura before glancing indifferently at Ta Mu. Remember this well in the future. You don't have the qualifications to question Skywolf Fort. Questioning the 4 people that came out earlier for cheating was undoubtedly questioning the fairness of Skywolf Fort. As the Fort Master of Skywolf Fort and the host of the martial competition of the 10 dynasties this time, it was naturally impossible for Ning Can to watch idly by as someone questioned their Skywolf Fort. Otherwise, where would the dignity of Skywolf Fort exist? Where would the dignity of Skywolf Fort exist? If you didn't cheat, then so be it. What's there to be fierce for? Be careful, the angrier you get, the faster you die. Ta Mu didn't dare act presumptuously like before when he was suppressed by Ning Can's imposing aura. Yet he still couldn't help but mutter to himself. Even though his voice wasn't loud, yet what hearing ability did everyone present possess? Naturally, he heard everything clearly. Instantly, everyone was speechless. Isn't this young man from the Daryuan dynasty too audacious? You're courting death. Ning Can's face went grim, and he intended to punish Ta Mu with a raise of his hand. Vice Fort Master Ning, please show mercy. The robust old man from the Daryuan dynasty hurriedly pleaded for mercy, and at the same time, he raised his hand to slap Ta Mu on the back of the head before reprimanding with a grim voice. You stinking kid, quickly apologize to Vice Fort Master Ning? Out of consideration for his identity, Ning Can put down his raised hand when he saw this, and he waited for Ta Mu's apology. Why apologize? I'm not wrong. Ta Mu spoke with a serious expression, and this caused the robust old man's face to go completely dark, whereas Ning Can's expression became even more unsightly. Looks like you really don't know your limits if I don't punish you today. Ning Can's gaze went cold as he raised his hand once more, and his origin energy raged as he casually struck out with his palm. A palm print whistled out, and it was like Mount Tai was pressing down towards Ta Mu. Instantly, the expression of the robust old man that stood by Ta Mu's side changed greatly. Even though Ningqian had held back a lot in his attack, this palm strike wasn't something that he could receive. Boom! It wasn't until he saw a saber light whizzing past and shattering the palm print that the sturdy old man heaved a sigh of relief. He hurriedly looked into the distance and thanked gratefully. "Thank you, my lord." Saber 5. Just when the gazes of most people had descended onto the person who had acted, Ningqian had also looked at the person who had acted, and his face was gloomy. "What do you mean by this? I'm teaching a brat who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth a lesson. What does it have to do with you?" The person that attacked was precisely Saber 5 that stood by Sword 13's side. No matter if it was Ningqian or Saber 5 that made a move, both of them were short-lived, and the phenomenon of the heavens and the earth in the sky didn't have time to condense into form at all. Furthermore, it was obvious that they had only attacked casually, and had not used their full strength. Thus, even if there was a natural phenomenon, it could not represent their true strength. But according to the estimations of the people present, these two people were at least existences at the 7th level of the void transformation stage or above. Ningqian, you're the vice fort master of Skywolf Fort at any rate. Yet you're making a fuss about it with a junior that speaks without thinking. Isn't such actions slightly beneath your status? Saber 5 calmly looked Ningqian in the eye as he spoke frankly. Ningqian was instantly stunned when he heard this, and he was speechless. Yet, he was the vice fort master of Skywolf Fort, whereas Saber 6 was only a junior from a remote dynasty. It wasn't appropriate for him to make a move against the latter no matter what. "Master." Right at this moment, Zishang took a step forward and stared at Tamu with a fierce gaze as he said frankly, "This person questioned my Skywolf Fort and spoke disrespectfully to Master. Master, your status is respected, so it isn't appropriate for you to make a move. I'll properly teach him a lesson in your place during the martial competition of the 10 dynasties later." Haha. Good. Ningqian, who was originally in a difficult position and didn't know how to get out of this situation, laughed heartily when he heard Zishang, and for a time, he felt that he hadn't taken this personal disciple of his for nothing. "Why aren't you thanking that lord?" The representative of the Daryuan dynasty, the robust old man, glared at Tamu. Meanwhile, Tamu, who was terrified by Ningqian's palm strike to the point his countenance went ghastly pale, hurriedly looked at Saber 5. "Thank you, senior, for saving my life. Tamu will surely repay this kindness in the future." "There's no need for repayment." Saber 5 nodded and smiled. "Kid, you're very compatible with my temper." Tamu grinned, and then he seemed to have thought of something, causing his frivolous eyes to suddenly become fierce as he looked at Zishang. "If you want to teach me, Tamu, a lesson, then let's see if you have the ability. I'll let you see it." Zishang glanced at Tamu with disdain as he spoke proudly. Whoosh! In next to no time, the 6th person came out as well. Shockingly, the 6th person was the crown prince of the Darming dynasty, and the personal disciple of Feng Wei, Lu Yong. "Master, disciple is useless and has brought shame to you." After Lu Yong came out, he glanced at Feng Wei before lowering his head. His objective was originally the number tokens in the top 3. But never had he imagined that when he exerted all his strength to pass through the illusory crypt and intended to choose a number token, he instead noticed that not only were the number tokens in the top 3 gone, even the number tokens in the top 5 were gone. He'd only obtained the number 6 token. "Work harder later on." Feng Wei spoke indifferently, and he didn't have the intention to fuss about it with Lu Yong. Yes. Lu Yong instantly heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this. Whoosh! Right when Lu Yong returned to the side of the Darming dynasty's representative, another figure soared up into the sky from the illusory crypt to appear before everyone. This was a fiery red figure, and it had successfully drawn the gazes of everyone as soon as it appeared, because it was truly too dazzling. "It's her!" Many people couldn't help but exclaim in shock. Tian Wu. Duanling Tian, who'd always been sitting cross-legged in midair and cultivating, had already opened his eyes when Lu Yong came out, and he didn't continue cultivating. After he roughly understood what had occurred during the period of his cultivation from Feng Wu Dao, he saw a familiar figure walk out from the exit of the illusory crypt. After Lu Yong, the person that came out was actually Feng Tianwu. Duanling Tian couldn't help but be moved. Tianwu was the 6th to walk out of the illusory crypt? How did she do it? At this moment it wasn't just Duan Lingtian who was moved. Even Feng Wu Dao, Sword 13, and Saber 5 couldn't help but be moved. The two vice fort masters of Skywolf Fort were completely dumbstruck. They weren't unfamiliar to this red-clothed young woman with a drop-dead gorgeous appearance, and she was one of the 10 young geniuses from the Dark Han dynasty that had come to participate in the martial competition of the 10 dynasties this time. At the same time, she was the youngest amongst the 100 young geniuses that were participating in the martial competition of the 10 dynasties. She looked to be a little over 20, yet her true age was only 25. 25 years old, the seventh to pass through the illusory crypt after the third-level void interpretation stage martial artist, Lu Yong? It's someone from the Dark Han dynasty again. These members of the Dark Han dynasty wouldn't know of some shortcut, right? Otherwise, how could they possibly pass through the illusory crypt so quickly? She's only 25. Could it be that she's a third-level void interpretation stage martial artist? Feng Tianwu had successfully drawn the gazes of everyone present and became the center of attention. This red-clothed young woman with a peerless appearance that was like a spirit of fire had caused everyone present to be extremely shocked. When faced with the numerous burning gazes, Feng Tianwu's beautiful face was filled with calmness, and only when she looked at Duan Lingtian and Feng Wu Dao that stood together in the distance did she bloom with a smile that could topple all living things. A smile that could topple a city, a smile that could topple a kingdom. It was nothing more than this. Whoosh! Under the numerous burning gazes, Feng Tianwu flew out and arrived by the side of Duan Lingtian and Feng Wu Dao in a short moment. Elder brother Duan, father. Seniors. Subsequently, Feng Tianwu called out to Sword 13 and Saber 5 that had dumbstruck expressions. Sword 13 and Saber 5 recovered from their shock and looked at Feng Wu Dao in unison before sighing. Elder Wu Dao, you've really given birth to a good daughter. Feng Wu Dao revealed a proud expression between his brows when he heard this. What a beautiful woman! Besides Duan Lingtian, Zishang and Tamu, Qifeng, Qin Kong, and Lu Yong stared at Feng Tianwu with burning gazes, and they wished for nothing more than to take her for themselves. But unfortunately, they were bound to be delusional. Feng Tianwu, Duan Lingtian and Duan Lingtian alone. If they were fated, she was willing to live hand in hand with Duan Lingtian and grow old together. If they weren't fated, she would rather grow old alone until the moment she closed her eyes. The two vice fort masters of Skywolf Fort looked at Feng Tianwu from afar, and their expressions sank slightly. They knew clearly in their hearts that since this woman was with Duan Lingtian, then it was absolutely impossible for her to join Skywolf Fort. Since she was unable to be of use to them, then they would eliminate her. Both of them glanced at each other, and both of them clearly saw killing intent that was difficult to restrain in each other's eyes. Wu, why did you come out so quickly? Feng Wu Dao asked with surprise, as he felt that he was unable to see through his daughter more and more. Tianwu, congratulations. After the nearby Duan Lingtian stretched out his spiritual force, he was stunned for a moment, and after he recovered from his shock, he congratulated Feng Tianwu. As soon as Duan Lingtian said this, not only was Feng Wu Dao puzzled, even the nearby Saber 5 and Sword 13 couldn't help but be stunned. They didn't know what Duan Lingtian meant by this. Could it be that Duan Lingtian saw through something? Elder brother Duan, you saw through it? Feng Tianwu looked at Duan Lingtian with surprise. Duan Lingtian nodded with a light smile. I truly never imagined that you would break through once more not long after breaking through to the void interpretation stage. Could it be that you obtained some sort of fortuitous encounter in the illusory crypt? Earlier, Duan Lingtian's spiritual force had stretched out and detected Feng Tianwu's current cultivation at the first possible moment, and it was actually at the second level of the void interpretation stage. After all, it had only been less than a month since Feng Tianwu had broken through to the first level of the void interpretation stage the last time. In other words, after breaking through to the first level of the void interpretation stage, Feng Tianwu had broken through to the second level of the void interpretation stage in less than a month. Such advancement was even swifter than when he consumed the rebirth pill. Chapter 810. What? Ooh, you've broken through to the second level of the void interpretation stage? As soon as Duan Lingtian finished speaking, Feng Tianwu hadn't even had the time to reply when Feng Wudao had already exclaimed in surprise. He was extremely clear about when his daughter had broken through to the first level of the void interpretation stage. But now when he heard Duan Lingtian and saw his daughter's reaction, he realized a problem. His daughter might have really broken through to the second level of the void interpretation stage. Yes. Feng Tianwu's reply caused Feng Wudao to be completely petrified. He only returned to his senses after a short moment and muttered, "What exactly did you encounter in the illusory crypt? Could it be that it's really as Ling Tian said, and you obtained some fortuitous encounter? Otherwise, how could you successively break through 2 levels in a short month of time?" Second level of the void interpretation stage? Successively breaking through 2 levels in a short month of time? The speaker didn't mean it, but the listener took it seriously. Feng Wudao's words shocked Sword 13 and Saber 5, and it caused their gazes to completely change when they looked at Feng Tianwu. This 25-year-old little girl's cultivation had advanced by 2 levels in a short month of time, and stepped into the second level of the void interpretation stage? How could this be possible? After all, no matter how good or how many spirit fruits one consumed, it was impossible to allow a void interpretation stage martial artist to advance by 2 levels in a short 1 or 2 months. The medicinal strength of the spirit fruit required time to be digested, otherwise, it would be impossible for it to be completely revealed. I passed through a barrier that was related to water. At that place, my entire body fused into the water and suffered the impact of the water. In the end, it seemed to have drawn out some sort of energy within my body, causing my origin energy to roil along with it, and then I directly broke through. Feng Tianwu replied, "A barrier of water?" Duan Lingtian naturally knew what Feng Tianwu spoke of, and it was none other than the area enveloped by the inscription formation that could create water. He had also encountered that obstacle, but his spiritual power had temporarily turned off the inscription formation at the first moment, so he didn't need to force his way through that obstacle. However, Feng Tianwu was different. She didn't have the same spiritual energy as Duan Lingtian, and she didn't understand the Tao of inscriptions. Therefore, it was impossible for her to do what Duan Lingtian did. She could only force her way in. Water can trigger some kind of power? Suddenly, Duan Lingtian had a flash of inspiration as he seemed to have thought of something, and he looked at Feng Wudao at the first possible moment. Meanwhile, Duan Lingtian noticed that Feng Wudao was looking at him. Fire spirit body. Duan Lingtian and Feng Wudao looked at each other and spoke at practically the same time. Obviously, they thought of the same thing. The energy in Feng Tianwu's body that was triggered by the water should be the extra energy in Feng Tianwu's fire spirit body. That energy would erupt completely when Feng Tianwu was 30 years old. And if Feng Tianwu was unable to hold on, then she would die for sure. Before that, that energy would be dispersed bit by bit to fuse into Feng Tianwu's body and assist her in her cultivation. This was also the reason why Feng Tianwu's cultivation advanced extremely swiftly. In this way, it was the water in the illusory crypt that forced the energy in Tianwu's body that belonged to the fire spirit body to erupt without restraint, and it assisted Tianwu to advance to the second level of the void interpretation stage in one go? Duan Lingtian guessed in his heart. "Tianwu, how did you feel when the energy in your body erupted?" Duan Lingtian asked with a serious expression. "At that time, I felt the meridians in my entire body were extremely scorching, and they were practically on the verge of exploding. At the critical moment, I squeezed the water around me and stretched out a strand of energy to suppress it, causing it to fuse into one with my origin energy and assist me in breaking through in one go." Feng Tianwu recalled the scene at that time. "Similar to what I thought." Duan Lingtian nodded. On the other hand, Feng Wudao realized how dangerous this matter was from his daughter, and he couldn't help but break out in cold sweat for her. The energy of the fire spirit body is formidable indeed. If it's able to be drawn out at an appropriate time like this, then perhaps it'll be able to allow Tianwu to possess a cultivation at the void transformation stage before the age of 30. If Tianwu is able to possess a cultivation at the void transformation stage before the age of 30, then she'll be able to forcefully withstand the energy of the fire spirit body that's concealed within her body. Duan Lingtian thought to himself, there's still almost 5 years of time. It's slightly pressing. In next to no time, Duan Lingtian's gaze became firm. No matter what, He would try his best to assist Tianwu to break through to the void transformation stage before the age of 30, and he would absolutely not watch helplessly as Tianwu perished. So long as Tianwu was able to endure the eruption of the fire spirit body at the age of 30, then her future would be boundless. Fire spirit body? Sword 13 and Saber 5 stared blankly at Feng Tianwu, and their eyes contained slight pity mixed within. They naturally knew what the fire spirit body meant, and it meant that it was impossible for a person that possessed such a physique to live past the age of 30, unless the person broke through to the void transformation stage before the age of 30. But to a possessor of the fire spirit body, this was practically impossible. Possessors of the fire spirit body might be able to consume spirit fruits to assist in their cultivation at the beginning, but once they stepped into the void interpretation stage, they would be unable to consume spirit fruits to cultivate. Because the medicinal strength contained within the spirit fruits used by void interpretation stage martial artists was too strong, and it would mobilize the energy concealed within the fire spirit body to a certain extent. At that time, the slightest consequence would be qi deviation, and the slightest consequence would be sudden death. Duan Lingtian was naturally aware of this, otherwise, he wouldn't feel that time was pressing. Tianwu was a possessor of the fire spirit body, and she'd already broken through to the void interpretation stage. If she was able to consume spirit fruits and coupled with the assistance of the fire concept fragments, it wouldn't be difficult for her to break through to the void transformation stage before the age of 30. But the problem was that even if a spirit fruit used by void interpretation stage martial artists was placed before Tianwu, she would still be unable to consume it. This was also the most troublesome aspect of the situation. No matter what, Tianwu, you can be considered to have profited from misfortune this time. Duan Lingtian smiled. Whoosh! Suddenly, another figure appeared at the exit of the illusory crypt. This was the seventh person to come out after Feng Tianwu. This was a young man with an ordinary appearance, and the first thing he did when he came out was to sweep the group of people in the sky above the combat ring with his gaze. It was as if he wanted to know who took away the number 1 to 7 command tokens. When his gaze touched Duan Lingtian and Feng Tianwu, a shocked expression of disbelief appeared on his face. How could this be possible? It's a member of the Darchu dynasty. The number 1 expert in the younger generation of the Darchu dynasty, O-chan. In next to no time, someone recognized the identity of the 8th young man that walked out from the illusory crypt. O-chan. The face of the representative of the Darchu dynasty was filled with smiles when he saw O-chan come out in time. How could they possibly come out before me? After O-chan returned to the side of the representative of the Darchu dynasty, he was still unwilling to believe that Duan Lingtian and Feng Tianwu were able to pass out of the illusory crypt before him. That Duan Lingtian is extraordinary. It's the first time he's come out. The number 1 command token is in his possession. The representative of the Darchu dynasty couldn't refrain from speaking when he noticed O-chen's gaze had always been staring at Duan Lingtian. What? O-chen's face that was already covered in shock completely froze when he heard this. After a short moment, he recovered from his shock and fiercely gulped down a mouthful of saliva. This Duan Lingtian is actually a person that came out of the illusory crypt for the first time? Which red-clothed young woman by his side was the first to come out? O-chan took a deep breath and asked. She came out comparatively later, but she was the 7th to come out before you. The number 7 command token ought to be in her possession. The representative of the Darchu dynasty sighed. You're at the 3rd level of the void interpretation stage, yet you actually came out after her. Could it be that her strength surpasses you? She seems to be only 25, right? It ought to be impossible. O-chan shook his head, and at the same time he thought in his heart. Perhaps it's because the time she spent in the illusory crypt when encountering those illusory formations was comparatively shorter. It's impossible for her to be stronger than me in terms of strength. After O-chan, the 9th person quickly came out. Another woman. The person that appeared before everyone now was a woman with a hot figure that wore tight clothes, but unfortunately, her appearance could only be considered to be ordinary. But she was able to stand out as a woman, and it was sufficient to show her formidable strength. After all, amongst the 100 young geniuses of the 10 dynasties that were participating in the martial competition of the 10 dynasties this time, there weren't more than 20 female martial artists. Her ability to come out at this moment undoubtedly indicated that she'd already suppressed over 70 male martial artists. It's Yi Ling, the publicly acknowledged female overlord of the younger generation of the Darchu dynasty. Supposedly, she was already at the second level of the void interpretation stage a year ago, and it's extremely likely that she has broken through to the third level of the void interpretation stage now. Someone recognized this young woman? Darchu dynasty's Yi Ling? After Feng Tianwu, Duan Lingtian couldn't help but be slightly surprised when he saw the second woman appear at this moment. If nothing unexpected happens, I ought to be the one and only female martial artist that obtained the top 10 command tokens. A wisp of a complacent smile appeared on Yi Ling's seemingly ordinary face when faced with the numerous gazes that converged onto her, and the numerous exclamations of surprise. But when her gaze shot towards the distance, it was completely fixed there and was unable to move away any longer. How could this be possible? How could she possibly have come out earlier than me? Yi Ling's gaze stared fixedly at the distant Feng Tianwu as her pupils constricted, and she was unwilling to accept that everything she saw before her eyes was real. How could there possibly be a woman that had come out of the illusory crypt earlier than her? Moreover, it was a woman that was beautiful to the point it caused her to be envious. As a woman who didn't wish to possess a drop-dead gorgeous face. In the past, she'd seen many women that were more beautiful than her. But practically all those women were just flower vases. So what if they were beautiful? In this world where the strong were respected, she was able to control their fates. So all along, Yi Ling felt that even though the heavens didn't bestow upon her a drop-dead gorgeous face, it had given her natural talent in the martial Tao that wasn't inferior to a man. But now Feng Tianwu had mercilessly crushed the pride in her heart, and it caused her to feel that she was like a pitiable bug. In terms of appearance, she was inferior to Yi Ling. In terms of strength, Chapter 8:11. Perhaps she took some sort of shortcut and was able to come out before me. How old is she? It's impossible for her strength to be stronger than me. Yi Ling ceaselessly consoled herself. No matter what, she didn't believe that she would be surpassed by a young woman that was younger than her. As the strongest expert in the younger generation of the Darqing dynasty, she had her own arrogance. Tianwu, that Yi Ling seems to be extremely unwilling to submit to you. Duan Lingtian smiled. Feng Tianwu glanced indifferently at Yi Ling before paying no further attention to her. A young woman that was 10 years older than her wasn't worthy of her comparing herself with her. After the 9th person from the Darqing dynasty, the 10th person came out as well. The Dartang dynasty Li Ji. Li Ji was a handsome young man around the age of 35, and at the same time, he was the Dartang dynasty's 11th prince. Since then, the possessors of the top 10 command tokens had all appeared. The possessor of the number 1 command token, Duan Lingtian from the Darkhan dynasty. The possessor of the number 2 command token, Zishang from the Darkhan dynasty. The possessor of the number 3 command token, Qi Feng from the Darqi dynasty. The possessor of the number 4 command token, Qin Kong from the Darqin dynasty. The possessor of the number 5 command token, Ta Mu from the Daryuan dynasty. The possessor of the number 6 command token, Lu Yong from the Darming dynasty. The possessor of the number 7 command token, Feng Tianwu from the Darkhan dynasty. The possessor of the number 8 command token, O Chan from the Darchu dynasty. The possessor of the number 9 command token, Yi Ling from the Darqing dynasty. The possessor of the number 10 command token, Li Ji from the Dartang dynasty. Amongst the possessors of the top 10 command tokens, 3 are from the Darkhan dynasty. This time the Darkhan dynasty is really in the limelight. The representatives of the various dynasties side with emotion. Of course, there were also the representatives of 2 dynasties that had gloomy expressions because not a single one of the young geniuses recommended by their dynasties had obtained a token in the top 10. Presently, the owners of the top 10 command tokens had appeared successively. The owners of the remaining 40 command tokens had appeared along with them. Numerous figures stepped out from the exit of the illusory crypt and appeared in the sky above the combat ring in the blink of an eye. These people included Su Li, Long Yun, and Zhang Shouyong, and they returned to the side of Duan Lingtian's group one by one. The young geniuses of the various dynasties that are participating in the martial competition of the 10 dynasties this time are really filled with hidden dragons and crouching tigers. I feel that my speed can be considered to be swift, yet I only obtained command token number 12. Su Li sighed. Su Li obtained token number 12, and Long Yun obtained token number 19. What caused Duanling Tian to be surprised was that Zhang Shouyong actually obtained the number 15 token. For a moment, he extended his spiritual power, intending to probe Zhang Shouyong's depth. In the end, he found some clues. Zhang Shouyong had suddenly broken through to the second level of the void interpretation stage. Congratulations, Brother Zhang. Duanling Tian smiled and congratulated Zhang Shouyong. Brother Ling Tian, I can't hide anything from you. Zhang Shouyong smiled bitterly. Although he was surprised that Duanling Tian was able to see through his cultivation, he wasn't surprised. In his opinion, no matter what miracle it was, so long as it occurred on this Brother Ling Tian, then it couldn't be considered a miracle. Big Brother Zhang has broken through? Feng Tianwu's gaze lit up, and then she congratulated Zhang Shouyong. Young Miss Tianwu, you came out before us. What number token did you obtain? Su Li looked at Feng Tianwu and asked with slight anticipation. What? Originally, after Zhang Shouyong came out, he was already surprised when he saw Feng Tianwu had come out before him, but he only thought that Feng Tianwu had come out before him. Now when he heard Su Li say this, he realized that Feng Tianwu had come out before Su Li. Su Li had obtained token number 12. In other words, the token Feng Tianwu obtained was either token number 11 or one of the top 10. Tianwu is much stronger than you. Sword 13 was obviously extremely dissatisfied that Su Li had only obtained token number 12, and he intended to strike a blow to Su Li. Tianwu obtained token number 7. Token number 7? As soon as these words were spoken, Su Li was instantly petrified, whereas Zhang Shouyong and Long Yun were dumbstruck. Stinking kid, you're at the bottom again this time. Looks like I have to use a special method to properly temper you after we return to the sect. Saber 5 looked at Long Yun and gnashed his teeth as he spoke. Long Yun's expression went grim when he heard this. Duanling Tian, what's the number of your token? After Su Li recovered from his shock, at the same time that he had a bitter smile on his face, he couldn't help but ask Duanling Tian, and he seemed to want to find balance from Duanling Tian. If Duanling Tian was inferior to Feng Tianwu, then he could use this to refute his master. But unfortunately, he was bound to be disappointed. Number 1. Duanling Tian spoke with a light smile. For a time, Su Li was petrified once more, whereas Zhang Shouyong, who just recovered from his shock, couldn't help but cough and choke on his own saliva. Long Yun's face sank slightly as he never imagined that Duanling Tian had actually obtained token number 1. And this also indicated that Duanling Tian was the first to leave the illusory crypt. Duanling Tian, since you're the first to leave, then do you know who the other 8 people besides Tianwu are that have obtained tokens in the top 10? Su Li asked. In next to no time, Su Li found out about the other 8 people that had obtained tokens in the top 10 from Duanling Tian. He wasn't surprised that Zishang had obtained token number 2. He'd witnessed Zishang's secret technique, and it was extremely formidable. At that time, Zishang was only at the 9th level of the void initiation stage. Yet when he executed that secret technique, his strength instantly rose to the 4th level of the void interpretation stage. Presently, Zishang had most probably broken through to the void interpretation stage just like them, and when he executed that secret technique, his strength was at least at the 5th level of the void interpretation stage or above. Looks like only you're capable of countering Zishang in this martial competition of the 10 dynasties. Su Li sighed. Zishang. Duanling Tian's eyes flickered with cold lights as he'd already decided that during the 4th round of the selections, he would be the first to challenge Zishang. Unless Zishang admitted defeat, otherwise, he'd surely make Zishang die a graveless death. Along with the passage of time, the sky gradually dimmed down. Dusk arrived as scheduled. The 50 young geniuses of the 10 dynasties had finally emerged, and the 50 number tokens had their own owners. The 3rd round of the selections will be held at dawn tomorrow. At that time, the top 10 of the martial competition of the 10 dynasties will be decided. After Ningkan announced this, he left with Feng Wei. Zishang and Lu Yong followed. That's Zishang. Su Li and Zhang Shouyong couldn't help but be stunned when they saw this scene. Zishang has already been taken as Ning Can's personal disciple, Duan Lingtian said. Su Li and Zhang Shouyong came to a sudden understanding. I truly never imagined that the number 1 token would actually be obtained by the Dark Han Dynasty's Duan Lingtian. His luck is really good. It's surely luck. Many young geniuses that came from the other dynasties discussed animatedly, and they obviously didn't feel that Duan Lingtian had relied on his own strength to obtain the number 1 token. Duan Lingtian couldn't be bothered to pay attention to this. Luck? During the 3rd round of the selections tomorrow, he would use his actions to prove his strength and make these people shut their mouths. The biggest winner today was none other than the Dark Han Dynasty. The Dark Han Dynasty had monopolized 3 of the top 10 number tokens, and it caused the other 9 dynasties to only be envious and jealous. The smile on the Dark Han Dynasty's emperor's face never stopped. At this moment, he seemed to have already completely forgotten the deaths of his son and nephew. Let's return. Duan Lingtian's group quickly left the combat arena and returned to their respective pavilions. I'm still slightly lacking. Duan Lingtian sat cross-legged on the bed and cultivated for a while, and he couldn't help but sigh when he noticed his cultivation hadn't improved at all. Even though his cultivation had the formidable medicinal strength of the rebirth pill, it was still slightly lacking from breaking through to the 3rd level of the void interpretation stage. Meanwhile, Duan Lingtian knew that he shouldn't continue persisting in improving his cultivation, because no matter how persistent he was, it would be difficult for his cultivation that had fallen into a bottleneck to improve. Presently, it was as if he'd entered a dead end, and if he wanted to pass through it, he needed to calm down first before he could think of a good method. Duan Lingtian left the room and stood outside the Narcissus Pavilion, as he cultivated the high-grade heaven-rank martial skill, 9 Dragons Radiant Flash, while he held onto the wind concept fragment and continued to comprehend wind concept. He became more and more skilled in the 9 Dragons Radiant Flash, and at the end, he was able to utilize it like an extension of his arm. Even the 3rd Divine Dragon was almost condensed into form, and once it was condensed into form, he could be considered to have stepped into the initial stage. As for wind concept, I've just comprehended 2nd level intermediate wind concept today, and it's difficult for it to improve for a while, Duan Lingtian muttered to himself. A night passed quickly. The dawn of the 2nd day arrived in the blink of an eye. Dawn had just appeared in the horizon when Duan Lingtian had already walked out of his room and converged with Feng Tianwu, who'd similarly walked out of her room before soaring up into the sky. Feng Wudao had been standing in the sky since long ago and was waiting for them. In the sky above the combat arena, after the representatives and young geniuses of the various dynasties had arrived, the Vice Fort Master of Skywolf Fort, Ning Can, and Feng Wei appeared successively, and Zishang and Lu Yong followed behind them like shadows. Today the 3rd round of the selections will begin. The rules of the 3rd round of the selections are just as I said before the 2nd round of the selections began yesterday. Challenges will start from the possessor of the number 1 token, yet you're unable to challenge the possessors of the number 2 to 10 tokens. Ning Can repeated the rules of the 3rd round of the selections once more. Besides that, those that have just fought a battle can rest temporarily. The person that issues a challenge in the next round is prohibited from issuing a challenge to that person. Ning Can continued. Life and death are disregarded in the 3rd round of the selections. You can admit defeat verbally, and no one is allowed to make a move against a person that admits defeat. The hearts of all the young geniuses constricted, and then they nodded successively. Now the possessor of the number 1 token can enter the arena to issue a challenge. Besides the possessors of the number 2 to 10 tokens, you can choose anyone. Ning Can glanced indifferently at Duan Lingtian. Even though he wished for nothing more than to slice Duan Lingtian into pieces, yet he knew that he couldn't lose his composure now. Swoosh! Chapter 8:12. The possessors of the number 11 to 50 command token. Step out and form a line according to the number of the command token. Ning Can pointed towards an empty expanse of space. Instantly, the 40 young geniuses including Su Li, Zhang Shouyong, and Long Yun flew out one by one to form an orderly line. Duan Lingtian stood at the center area of the sky above the combat arena, and his eyes flickered with flowing lights as he sized up the 40 young geniuses that had formed a line before him. Besides the familiar faces of Su Li, Zhang Shouyong, and Long Yun amongst these people, there was another face that he was extremely familiar with. Duan Lingtian has obtained the number 1 command token and possesses the absolute initiative. Who do all of you think he'll challenge? Someone couldn't help but ask in a low voice. Of course. He'll surely challenge the possessor of the number 50 command token. Another person spoke as a matter of course. Most people agreed in this way. However, at this moment, Duan Lingtian's gaze didn't descend onto the possessor of the number 50 command token, and it had instead locked onto the last familiar face besides Su Li, Zhang Shouyong, and Long Yun. The possessor of the number 17 command token, Zhao Wei, the number 1 expert in the younger generation of the Darming dynasty's Zhao clan, an existence that was merely inferior to Lu Yong in the younger generation of the Darming dynasty. Most importantly, Zhao Wei and Duan Lingtian had once come into conflict. A few months ago, Zhao Wei had lost at the hands of Duan Lingtian in the 9th floor of the Ice Flame Pavilion, and he hadn't even touched the corners of Duan Lingtian's clothes. I choose to challenge the possessor of the number 17 command token. After Duan Lingtian's gaze locked onto Zhao Wei, he spoke frankly. Instantly, the people present were in an uproar. This Duan Lingtian actually challenged the possessor of the number 17 command token? According to my knowledge, even if it's the possessor of the number 10 command token, there are many existences at the 2nd level of the void interpretation stage or above. Could it be that this Duan Lingtian has the confidence to defeat a martial artist at the 2nd level of the void interpretation stage or above? Many people that questioned Duan Lingtian's strength discussed successively. On the other hand, Zhao Wei, who was challenged by Duan Lingtian, had an extremely gloomy expression, and he took a deep breath under the numerous burning gazes before he said frankly, I admit defeat. Admit defeat. As soon as Zhao Wei said this, a wave of booing instantly sounded out at the scene. Which dynasty are they from? To be able to obtain token number 17, his strength must not be weak. To think that he doesn't even have the courage to accept the challenge. Many people looked at Zhao Wei with disdain. I know him. He's one of the 2 most outstanding people in the younger generation of the Darming dynasty, and he's equally famous as Vice Fort Master Feng's personal disciple, Lu Yong. It can't be? Such a coward could also be equally famous as Lu Yong? You must be joking. I also feel that such a coward is not qualified to be on the same level as Lu Yong. Being equally famous with him is simply a disgrace to Lu Yong. Many people added insult to injury. In this world where the strong were respected, cowards were looked down upon the most. Zhao Wei's cowardice was disgusting. When Zhao Wei heard the waves of ridicule coming from the surroundings, his face alternated between green and white, yet he had no way to refute. He was indeed afraid of Duan Lingtian. When he fought Duan Lingtian that day, he hadn't even touched the corners of Duan Lingtian's clothes before losing. If it wasn't for Duan Lingtian not killing him, it would be impossible for him to be standing here now. Earlier, when Duan Lingtian looked at him, he'd clearly seen the coldness that was emitted from Duan Lingtian's eyes. He knew that once he accepted the challenge, his life wouldn't be in his control any longer. So for the sake of living properly, he didn't dare accept the challenge and directly admitted defeat. To him, this was the wisest choice. Thank you. Duan Lingtian glanced deeply at Zhao Wei before thanking him before returning to Feng Tianwu's side. For a time, Zhao Wei was angered to the point his face alternated between green and white. Subsequently, the possessor of the number 2 token entered the arena. The possessor of the number 2 token, Zishang, a young genius of the Dark Han dynasty, and he was the personal disciple of the Skywolf Fort's Vice Fort Master, Ning Can. I heard this Zishang was taken as a personal disciple by Vice Fort Master Ning. He's the 2nd person after Duan Lingtian to pass through the illusory crypt. I presume he's not a simple figure since he's able to be taken as a personal disciple by Vice Fort Master Ning. The gazes of many people descended onto Zishang as they discussed. After Zishang ascended the arena, his gaze descended onto the possessor of the number 50 token, a green-clothed young man, and he spoke indifferently. The possessor of the number 50 token. Even though terror rose from the bottom of the green-clothed young man's heart when he was called out by Zishang, he still gritted his teeth and flew out to stand in confrontation with Zishang. If it wasn't for the scene of everyone ridiculing Zhao Wei earlier, he might have directly admitted defeat. Now, with the lesson of the past, he didn't do that for the sake of his dignity. I'll admit defeat once I'm no match for him, the green-clothed young man thought to himself. He'd already decided that once he was no match for Zishang, he would admit defeat at the first possible moment. Admitting defeat like this was much more dignified than Zhao Wei. After all, Zhao Wei didn't even have the courage to ascend the arena. You dare to ascend the arena? When he saw the green-clothed young man actually didn't take the initiative to admit defeat and even dared to ascend the arena to stand in confrontation with him and intend to fight him, Zishang's expression instantly sank. His sworn enemy, Duanling Tian, had challenged the possessor of the number 17 token. Yet the latter didn't even have the courage to ascend the arena and directly admitted defeat. Now, when he challenged the possessor of the number 50 token, he originally thought that the possessor of the number 50 token would probably not dare ascend the arena or even admit defeat directly. In this way, he wouldn't lose to his sworn enemy, Duanling Tian. However, things went contrary to his wishes. After the possessor of the number 50 token was challenged by him, the possessor of the number 50 token entered the arena calmly as if the possessor wasn't afraid of him, and at the same time that this caused him to suffer a great blow, ruthlessness arose in his heart. No matter what, I'll give it a try. The green-clothed young man gritted his teeth as he spoke. Sometimes a wrong decision will cause you to lose your life. Zishang's eyes were filled with bloodthirsty killing intent. Since the possessor of the number 50 token had embarrassed him, then he would make the possessor use his life to repent. Ha! The green-clothed young man's face went grim when he heard Zishang, yet he still summoned up the courage to fly out, and a spirit weapon appeared in his hand as the origin energy in his entire body exploded out, causing Concept to follow him like a shadow. The green-clothed young man utilized all his ability to cause the phenomenon of the heavens and the earth to form over 50 ancient horned dragon silhouettes. A cultivation at the first level of the void interpretation stage. First level void interpretation concept. Grade 4 spirit weapon. Whoosh! Zishang's expression remained unchanged when facing the green-clothed young man's assault, and with a raise of his hand, an extremely ancient zither appeared in his hand. Along with Zishang raising his hand, origin energy coiled around it as 30 ancient horned dragon silhouettes appeared in the sky above him, and it displayed his current cultivation. Second level of the void interpretation stage. Zishang has actually broken through? Duanling Tian's pupils constricted. If he wasn't wrong, Zishang was only a first-level void interpretation stage martial artist yesterday. So how could he have broken through to the second level of the void interpretation stage overnight? Looks like Ningqing gave him some benefits. Perhaps he broke through after consuming a spirit fruit. This was something that wasn't difficult for Duanling Tian to guess. The green-clothed young man's face went grim when he saw Zishang reveal a cultivation at the second level of the void interpretation stage, and his figure instantly slowed down and started to decelerate. At the same time he opened his mouth. I admit, but unfortunately, he was bound to be unable to speak out the word lose. Clang! Along with Zishang's hand descending and slapping onto the surface of the zither strings moved rhythmically before abruptly emitting a wave of ear-piercing and enormous sounds. At the same time, a material green crescent-shaped ripple that was coiled with a strand of scorching aura of flame swept out, and its target was the green-clothed young man. Halfway through, the aura of flames expanded even more. The might of the wind was aided by the might of the fire. Second-level void interpretation stage cultivation. First-level intermediate wind concept, elementary fire concept, and coupled with the grade 4 spirit weapon, the zither, it gave Zishang the strength of over 70 ancient horned dragons. The crescent-shaped ripple that emitted strands of scorching aura of flames had split the green-clothed young man into two before he could even speak the word lose. Clang! 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 Subsequently, another wave of ear-piercing sounds of zither explosions resounded out, and numerous crescent-shaped ripples that emitted scorching aura of flames seemed to have formed into a dense and enormous net that enveloped the green-clothed young man's corpse that had been split into two. In the next moment, only a rain of blood remained in the sky, and after the rain of blood descended to the ground, the green-clothed young man's corpse had vanished without a trace. Hiss! 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 In the sky above the combat arena, waves of gasping sounded out, and many people revealed terrified gazes as they looked at Zishang. Chapter 8:13. To think that Darming Dynasty's Zhao Wei didn't even have the courage to enter the arena before admitting defeat, because he was afraid of the number 1 token in Duan Lingtian's possession. Now, his intestines are probably green with regret, right? If that Duan Lingtian challenges me, then I'll surely accept the challenge. Not only will I accept the challenge, I'll even defeat him and seize the number 1 token in his possession. If I'm able to obtain the number 1 token, then it would be great. In the future, I'll be able to challenge anyone I want to challenge, and I'll specially choose soft persimmons to crush. It wouldn't be difficult for me to enter the top 10 of the martial competition of the 10 dynasties. At this moment, many young geniuses looked forward to Duan Lingtian and Feng Tianwu challenging them. As far as they were concerned, the number 1 token in Duan Lingtian's possession and the number 7 token in Feng Tianwu's possession weren't obtained by relying on true ability, and they'd obtained it through opportunistic means. Of course, there were some people that were familiar with Duan Lingtian and Duan Lingtian, and they knew that the number tokens in Duan Lingtian and Zishang's possession weren't obtained through opportunistic means. After Zishang, the possessor of the number 2 token, left the arena. The possessor of the number 3 token, Qifeng, entered the arena. Qifeng naturally wouldn't not utilize the authority of the number 3 token, and directly chose the possessor of the number 49 token. His opponent admitted defeat. After that, the possessor of the number 4 token, Qin Kong, entered the arena, and his opponent admitted defeat as well. The possessor of the number 5 token, Tamu, and the possessor of the number 6 token, Lu Yong, entered the arena after them, and their opponents didn't have the courage to battle them. Subsequently, it was the turn of the possessor of the number 7 token, Feng Tianwu. Feng Tianwu flew out and chose the possessor of the number 45 token, a tall and robust young man that was almost middle-aged and had disheveled hair that hung loosely on his shoulders. The young man was an entire 2 meters tall, and he was like a giant as he stood before Feng Tianwu. "Little girl, your appearance isn't bad, but unfortunately, the number 7 token in your possession was obtained through opportunistic means. You're bound to not be a match for me. Hand over the number 7 token and admit defeat." The young man that was like a giant spoke with a low voice. "Otherwise, don't force me to ruthlessly destroy you." "Haha. Big guy, you have to be gentle. She's just a 25-year-old girl." Someone couldn't help but laugh. For a moment, many people laughed along with him. These people all felt that Feng Tianwu did not have much strength. "If you want token number 7, come and get it yourself." In the face of the youth's arrogance, Feng Tianwu's expression did not change. She stood there in the air, and the red robe on her body fluttered without wind, as if she had turned into a ball of burning flames. This little girl really doesn't know what's good for her. Since that's the case, let me teach you a lesson. The corners of the young man's mouth curled up into an evil smile. In the next moment, his tall and sturdy figure flew out. Although it seemed cumbersome, it did not affect his speed at all. At the same time that he flashed towards Feng Tianwu, an enormous spiked club appeared in the young man's hand. Origin energy flickered within it, and then it transformed into a ball of material flames. Almost 60 silhouettes of ancient horned dragons dashed out. Even though he looked down upon Feng Tianwu, he didn't dare be careless in the slightest in the battles of the martial competition of the 10 dynasties, and he utilized his full strength as soon as he attacked. The entire sky above the combat arena was completely in an uproar because of Feng Tianwu's brief attack. What a formidable little girl! Even the vice fort master of Skywolf Fort, Ning Kan, couldn't help but take a few more glances at Feng Tianwu. and in the end his eyes were filled with killing intent. If a genius martial artist that possessed such heaven-defying natural talent and comprehension ability was unable to join their Skywolf fort, then he would rather let her die than allow her to live. Once such a monstrous existence stood on the opposite side of Skywolf fort in the future, she would surely become a great calamity for Skywolf fort. That was something he wasn't willing to see happen. Shang, if this woman is able to pass through the third round of the selections and advance to the fourth round of the selections, you must kill her. Ningkan looked at Zishang and spoke via voice transmission. Yes, master. Zishang's gaze that was filled with coldness descended onto Feng Tianwu when he heard this, and killing intent flashed within his eyes. Ningkan wants Zishang to kill Tianwu? Duan Lingtian's observation ability was shocking, and he easily noticed the killing intent that flickered in the depths of Ningkan's gaze when he looked at Feng Tianwu. Moreover, he noticed the reaction Zishang revealed when Ningkan glanced at him. He guessed Ningkan's thoughts. Let me see if it's you Zishang who kills Tianwu or Tianwu who kills you Zishang. A wisp of a cold smile suffused the corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth, and he had a way to deal with it in his heart. In the battle between Feng Tianwu and the young man that was like a giant, the young man was heavily injured with a single strike and didn't have the strength to continue the battle, so Feng Tianwu was victorious. Whoosh! After a short moment, Feng Tianwu returned to Duan Lingtian's side. Tianwu, when did you comprehend the fourth-level intermediate fire concept? Duan Lingtian couldn't refrain himself from asking via voice transmission. Perhaps when others saw Feng Tianwu attack, the phenomenon of the heavens and the earth hadn't condensed into form, so they were unable to confirm exactly what Feng Tianwu's cultivation and concept was. But Duan Lingtian, who possessed the memories and experience of 2 lifetimes of Samsara Emperor Wu, was able to discern with a single glance that the fire concept Feng Tianwu executed earlier was obviously already at the 4th-level intermediate fire concept. This caused Duan Lingtian's heart to be filled with shock. It was also something that happened in the illusory crypt. I entered into a short period of enlightenment during the trial of fire, and after I awoke from my stupor, I comprehended 4th-level intermediate fire concept. Feng Tianwu wasn't surprised that Duan Lingtian had seen through the level of her fire concept. There were too many miracles and unbelievable things on Duan Lingtian, and she'd long since become numb to it. In her eyes, this elder brother Duan of hers was capable of what others were incapable of. As expected of the fire spirit body, it's actually so abnormal. At the same time that Duan Lingtian was slightly speechless when he heard this, his heart was filled with shock. He knew that the reason Feng Tianwu was able to obtain all sorts of fortuitous encounters in the illusory crypt was entirely because she possessed the fire spirit body. If it was another person, it would be utterly impossible for the person to obtain such treatment. Meanwhile, the remaining 3 people in the top 10 command tokens issued challenges one by one. The opponents they challenged had admitted defeat before entering the arena. Subsequently, the possessor of the number 11 token issued a challenge. The possessor of the number 11 token was the person that was ranked before Su Li, and he was a young man that was dressed like a scholar. The possessor of the number 41 token that he challenged was heavily injured as soon as he entered the arena and didn't have the strength to continue fighting. Subsequently, it was Su Li, the possessor of the number 12 token that entered the arena. His opponent was injured by a single strike of his sword, and if it wasn't for him changing the blade of the sword in his hand to the body of the sword in time, his opponent would have died without a doubt. Thank you for showing mercy. Su Li's opponent was sincerely convinced and withdrew magnanimously. The third round of the selections continued. Not long after, it was Zhang Shouyong and Long Yun's turn, and they won successively. In next to no time, after a single round, 25 out of the 50 young geniuses were eliminated. They were either killed, crippled, or admitted defeat. After a single round, none of the possessors of the top 10 command tokens were replaced, and it was sufficient to show that their strengths were generally equal to the command tokens in their possession. The remaining 25 young geniuses continued to undergo the second round of challenges. As the possessor of the number 1 token, Duan Lingtian was the first to enter the arena once more. After he entered the arena, Duan Lingtian called out the possessor of the number 25 token, a young man with a savage appearance. The young man's eyes flickered with a fierce light at all times, and it was as if everyone was his enemy. At the center area of the sky above the combat arena, Duanling Tian and this young man with a savage appearance stood in confrontation, and the atmosphere became deathly silent. The deathly silent atmosphere didn't continue for long before it was quickly replaced by a wave of clamorous noise. The Dark Han Dynasty's Feng Tianwu has proven her strength to a certain extent. I wonder if Duanling Tian, who hasn't fought since the beginning until the end, will be able to prove his strength. If he's defeated by the possessor of the number 25 token, then he'll become the greatest laughingstock in the martial competition of the 10 dynasties this time. He's about to make a move. I truly look forward to it. Oh. Chapter 8:14. Possessor of the number 1 token. I'll tear you into pieces right away and replace you. The young man with a savage expression stuck out his tongue to lick his dry lips, and his ghastly eyes stared fixedly at Duanling Tian like a dormant venomous snake. That will depend on if you have the ability. Duanling Tian's expression remained unchanged as he spoke indifferently. This young man with a savage expression before him was the possessor of the number 25 token, and Duanling Tian had clearly seen it when the young man made a move against the possessor of the number 26 token earlier. When the young man wanted to beg for mercy, he'd forcefully grabbed the young man's throat and didn't allow the young man to make a single sound. In the end, the possessor of the number 26 token was torn into pieces by the young man with his bare hands. His spirit weapon was a grade 4 spirit weapon glove, and it was worn on his right hand. You'll know in a moment. The ghastly eyes of the young man with a savage expression flashed, and then his figure flashed out as if he'd transformed into a venomous snake that had gone berserk and fiercely bit towards Duanling Tian. His gloved hand abruptly stretched out to grab towards Duanling Tian, and the ghastly flames in the surroundings leaped about and condensed into form, seeming to have transformed into the open mouth of a venomous snake. In the sky, almost 70 ancient horned dragon silhouettes flashed towards Duanling Tian in unison, and revealed his shocking strength. Second level of the Void Interpretation stage. First level Intermediate Wind Concept. Grade 4 Spirit Weapon. The young man with a savage expression could be said to have utilized all his ability, and it was a killing move as soon as he attacked with the intention of killing Duanling Tian. You want me to die? Duanling Tian's eyes were filled with killing intent as his figure flashed out to move unhurriedly to intercept the young man. In the eyes of others, it seemed as if Duanling Tian had given himself up, right when some people thought that Duanling Tian's actions were courting death. A sword appeared out of thin air in Duanling Tian's hand, a grade 3 spirit sword. 9 Dragons Radiant Flash. The sword in Duanling Tian's hand shook as the origin energy in his hand fused with second-level Intermediate Wind Concept to transform into azure-colored strong winds that coiled around the sword before abruptly whistling out. Swoosh! Swoosh! Whoosh! 2 divine dragons that had materialized and 1 divine dragon that had yet to fully materialize roared out. As soon as they appeared, they successfully attracted everyone's attention. Dragons were legendary divine beasts that no one had ever seen with their own eyes. Of course, since the ancient times, there were various dragon totems and embroideries that were passed down. For example, the dragon robes worn by the emperors of the various dynasties were embroidered with a golden 5-clawed divine dragon. However, a lifelike divine dragon that was formed from origin energy was extremely rare. Whoosh! 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 Just as most people's attention was on the 3 mystical dragons, 2 of the fully formed mystical dragons suddenly shot out beams of light from their eyes. For beams of light shot towards the ferocious-looking young man. Their speed was so fast that it was shocking. Puff! The first beam of light easily pierced through the young man's hand that was grabbing at Duanling Tian like a viper's mouth, piercing through the grade 4 glove and leaving a bloody hole. Blood splattered everywhere. Puff! 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 Amongst the other 3 beams of light, one pierced through the young man's forehead, another pierced through the young man's neck, and the last pierced through the young man's heart. Not to mention the young man didn't even have the time to emit a shrill cry. He didn't even have the time to let out a muffled groan before completely losing all signs of life, and he was completely blasted flying by inertia. Whirlwind! Duan Lingtian's figure flashed out to intercept the corpse that was charging towards him after death, and he kicked it flying to cause it to fall onto the combat ring with a bang. In the sky, the 81 ancient horned dragon silhouettes formed from the energy of the heavens, and the earth gradually dispersed along with Duan Lingtian withdrawing his sword. Second level of the Void Interpretation stage. Second level Intermediate Wind concept. Even though the martial skill Duan Lingtian executed isn't bad, but with his strength, it seems that he doesn't have the qualifications to possess the number 1 token, right? After they witnessed Duan Lingtian's strength, many people couldn't help but voice out their doubts, and they doubted that Duan Lingtian didn't have the qualifications to possess the number 1 token. Even more people firmly believed that the number 1 token was obtained by Duan Lingtian by opportunistic means. In reality, Duan Lingtian could indeed be considered to have obtained it by opportunistic means, relying on the lifetime worth of inscription memories of Emperor Wu and his own spiritual force to temporarily shut off the inscription formations all along the passageway of the illusory crypt. Wasn't this opportunistic means? Of course, such opportunistic means wasn't something that anyone was capable of accomplishing. I was wondering how strong this Duan Lingtian was, yet he's only SOSO. The possessor of the number 4 token, Qin Kong, grunted coldly and glanced at Duan Lingtian with disdain. Since he's the first to obtain the number 1 token and pass through the illusory crypt, he naturally has extraordinary aspects. Looks like he still has trump cards that he hasn't revealed. The possessor of the number 3 token, Qi Feng, muttered to himself. After Duan Lingtian, it was the possessor of the number 2 token, Zishang, that ascended the arena. Zishang challenged the possessor of the number 24 token, and even though the possessor's strength wasn't bad, it was still inferior to him, causing the possessor to be instantly killed by the wind blades that flashed out from his zither. The challenges continued. The possessors of the top 10 tokens won successively all along the way. In next to no time, it was the turn of the possessor of the number 7 token, Feng Tianwu. If it was according to the order of the 6 people before her, then she ought to challenge the possessor of the number 19 token. However, the possessor of the number 19 token was Long Yun, and out of consideration for Saber 5, Feng Tianwu didn't challenge him, and she chose the possessor of the number 18 token instead. The possessor of the number 18 token possessed a cultivation at the second level of the Void Interpretation stage, and had comprehended second-level Void Interpretation concept, so he could be considered to be a formidable opponent. Right when everyone thought that Feng Tianwu would be in a deadlock with her opponent was instead defeated by Feng Tianwu in a single move. This time Feng Tianwu utilized a spirit weapon, a grade 3 spirit whip. Only a single whip had heavily injured her opponent. The phenomenon of the heavens and the earth hadn't even had the chance to condense into form before dispersing. Besides Duan Lingtian, Feng Tianwu's exact strength was still a mystery in the eyes of most people. Possessing such a cultivation at the mere age of 25 is truly shocking. If she's able to continue maintaining this advancement, she'll step into the void transformation stage without the slightest suspense if she's given another 10 years. Many people that were shocked by Feng Tianwu's strength couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Feng Tianwu allowed them to have a completely new understanding of female martial artists. Feng Tianwu, the possessor of the number 9 token, the other female that had obtained the top 10 tokens of the martial competition of the 10 dynasties, the Darqing dynasty's Yi Ling, looked at Feng Tianwu with a complicated gaze. When she was Feng Tianwu's age, she hadn't even stepped into the void initiation stage. Even though she was unwilling to admit it, she knew that Feng Tianwu's natural talent and comprehension ability were indeed stronger than her. But if I go against her now, I still have full confidence. Yi Ling was filled with confidence. Tianwu, you ought to help me teach that kid a good lesson. After Feng Tianwu returned, Saber 5 spoke, and he seemed to feel extremely regretful that Feng Tianwu didn't choose to challenge Long Yun. After Feng Tianwu, it was the possessor of the number 8 token, the Darchu dynasty's Ochan. The person Ochan chose to challenge was precisely the possessor of the number 19 token, Long Yun. Long Yun's master was the vice-sect master of the House of Sabers, and he'd already touched the threshold of the unity of man and saber. But because of the gap in cultivation and the difference in concept, he still lost to Ochan. Because he was afraid of Saber 5 who stood behind Long Yun, Ochan didn't attack ruthlessly. After Long Yun returned, he stood by Saber 5's side with a dejected expression. Master, I'm sorry. I've let you down and wasn't even able to enter the top 10. Humph. Saber 5 grunted coldly. After we return to the sect this time, I'll use the method of the House of Sabers to properly temper you. As he finished speaking, a wisp of an evil smile appeared on the corners of Saber 5's mouth, and it caused Long Yun to be unable to refrain from shuddering. Whoosh! After O-chan, it was the possessor of the number 9 token, Yi Ling, that entered the arena. Yi Ling challenged the possessor of the number 17 token and won. Subsequently, the possessor of the number 10 token, Li Ji, challenged the possessor of the number 16 token and won. Up until now, none of the top 10 token possessors had been replaced. The possessor of the number 11 token, the young man in scholarly attire, challenged the possessor of the number 15 token, Zhang Shouyong. Big Brother Zhang has encountered a strong enemy. Duan Lingtian's eyes flashed as he muttered. Just as Duan Lingtian had said, Zhang Shouyong and the possessor of the number 11 token were evenly matched for a time, and this was because he possessed the grade 3 spirit weapon, Wine Gourd, that Duan Lingtian had personally refined for him. The strength of the young man in scholarly attire was shocking. In the end, Zhang Shouyong barely defeated the young man and replaced him to obtain the number 11 token. Big Brother Zhang, you're amazing. Duan Lingtian's eyes lit up as he started laughing. In next to no time, it was the turn of the possessor of the number 12 token, Su Li, to challenge the possessor of the number 14 token. Su Li executed a total of 3 sword strikes and easily obtained victory. The possessor of the number 13 token had a bye. What's next? Meanwhile, only 13 people remained in the third round of the selections, and many people couldn't help but raise their heads to look at the 2 vice fort masters of Skywolf Fort. Now the final segment of the third round of the selections is about to begin. In this segment, the possessors of the number 11, 12, and 13 tokens will successively challenge the possessors of the top 10 tokens. Once you win, you'll be able to replace your opponent and obtain their token before charging into the top 10 of the martial competition of the 10 dynasties held by our Skywolf Fort this time. Ningkan spoke with a clear voice. Instantly, the eyes of Zhang Shouyong, Su Li, and the possessor of the number 13 token lit up. First, the possessor of the number 11 token, Zhang Shouyong, would issue a challenge. There was only a single chance, and if he didn't succeed, then he would have no fate with the top 10 of the martial competition of the 10 dynasties. Zhang Shouyong's gaze flashed past Duan Lingtian and the other 10 people before finally choosing Feng Tianwu, the possessor of the number 7 token. Amongst the possessors of the top 10 tokens, even the possessor of the number 10 token, Li Ji, was in existence at the third level of the void interpretation stage. Only Duan Lingtian, Zishang, and Feng Tianwu were existences at the second level of the void interpretation stage. Zhang Shouyong knew he wasn't a match for Duan Lingtian and Zishang, so he chose Feng Tianwu. Big Brother Zhang has bitten off more than he can chew this time. Chapter 8:15. Tianwu. Zhang Shouyong stood in confrontation with Feng Tianwu, and he had an embarrassed expression. After all, he'd challenged Feng Tianwu by name, and it was like he was bullying the weak. Big Brother Zhang, you don't have to worry. Feel free to attack with your full strength. Zhang Shouyong was a good friend of Duan Lingtian, and Feng Tianwu had taken Zhang Shouyong to be her friend as well and treated him with courtesy. All right. Zhang Shouyong nodded, and his expression became slightly serious as he didn't dare dally. Even though he was a second-level void interpretation stage martial artist that had comprehended second-level intermediate earth concept now, but based on the strength Feng Tianwu revealed earlier, she wasn't inferior to him. It was even to the extent that she might be slightly stronger. Tianwu, watch out! Zhang Shouyong shouted out explosively as he attacked like a bolt of lightning, and he raised his wine gourd before smashing it out. The wine gourd floated in midair and was covered by a layer of material earth concept, and it smashed down towards Feng Tianwu like a mountain pressing down onto her. Bang! An enormous bang that shook the heavens resounded out, and the terrifying sound of air exploding caused the eardrums of everyone present to tremble. At the same time, the phenomenon of the heavens and the earth appeared abruptly in the sky above Zhang Shouyong, and it condensed into 81 lifelike ancient horned dragon silhouettes that coiled down. Zhang Shouyong's wine gourd smashed down with a bang, and it contained the strength of 81 ancient horned dragons. Even if it smashed onto a mountain, the mountain would probably be shattered by it. Yet now the wine gourd smashed down towards Feng Tianwu, and once it smashed down, even 10 Feng Tianwu might not be able to survive. For a time, many people couldn't help but break out in cold sweat for Feng Tianwu. Duan Lingtian lightly smiled as he watched this scene, and he seemed to not be worried in the slightest. Whoosh! Feng Tianwu's expression remained unchanged when faced with Zhang Shouyong's wine gourd that smashed down towards her, and a whip appeared out of thin air in her hand. It was precisely the grade 3 spirit whip that Duan Lingtian had refined for her. Subsequently, Feng Tianwu's entire body seemed to have transformed into a ball of flames that shot into the sky. It was actually charging towards the falling wine gourd. Feng Tianwu's figure flashed like fire, and a layer of solid flames coiled around the third-grade spirit whip in her hand in an instant. She suddenly swung it out and threw it towards the wine gourd. Whoosh! The long whip tore through the air like a python swinging its tail. It contained an extremely terrifying force as it fiercely landed on the wine gourd. Pa! A loud sound rang out, tearing through the sky, causing the airflow in the air to surge, and the sound of the wind could be heard. Subsequently, under the gazes of everyone present, the material earth concept at the bottom of the wine gourd was actually split apart by this whip strike, and its speed of descent slowed down slightly. Whoosh! Feng Tianwu's hand trembled, and the third-grade spirit whip abruptly withdrew. Whoosh! In the next moment, the third-grade spirit whip that was retracted was fiercely thrown out again, like a rapidly shooting fire snake. Pa! Another enormous bang resounded out. This time the wine gourd was actually blasted flying, and the material earth concept on its surface was completely shattered. Wow! Zhang Shouyong, who used his origin energy to guide the wine gourd, instantly suffered backlash from his origin energy, causing his face to go pale as blood sprayed out from his mouth like an arrow of blood. Fourth level intermediate fire concept. As he looked at the phenomenon of the heavens and the earth that was an entire 20 ancient horned dragon silhouettes above Feng Tianwu, Zhang Shouyong had a bitter smile on his face at the same time he withdrew the wine gourd. If he knew Feng Tianwu's true strength since the beginning, he would absolutely not overestimate his ability and challenge Feng Tianwu. He and Feng Tianwu were on par with each other in terms of cultivation and spirit artifacts. He originally thought that their concepts were on par as well, and that was why he challenged Feng Tianwu. Never had he imagined that not only was Feng Tianwu's concept inferior to his, it was even stronger by an entire 20 ancient horned dragons. This gap was like a chasm that was difficult to surmount. I admit defeat. Zhang Shouyong opened his mouth and spoke with slight bitterness. Big brother Zhang, thank you for letting me win. Feng Tianwu smiled lightly before returning to Duan Lingtian's side. When Feng Tianwu fought earlier, the phenomenon of the heavens and the earth didn't have the time to condense into form. This time, the phenomenon of the heavens and the earth has finally condensed into form, yet never had I imagined that she would actually have comprehended fourth-level intermediate fire concept. Possessing a cultivation at the second level of the void interpretation stage, at the mere age of 25 and comprehending fourth-level intermediate fire concept. This Feng Tianwu is simply a monster. Has a monster like her ever appeared in the history of the 10 dynasties? Not to mention the 10 great dynasties, a monstrous genius like her is probably extremely rare even in the foreign lands. It's only because she was born in the Dark Han dynasty. If she was born in the foreign lands, I wonder how terrifying she would be. For a time the entire sky above the combat arena was in an uproar, and Feng Tianwu had become the center of attention. Such natural talent and comprehension ability could be said to be heaven-defying. She has actually comprehended fourth-level fire concept. Yi Ling's pupils constricted. Now, even she didn't dare say she could defeat Feng Tianwu with 100% certainty. Wu, when did you comprehend the fourth-level intermediate fire concept? After Feng Tianwu returned, Feng Wudao looked at her with a dumbstruck expression. On the other hand, the nearby Sword 13 and Saber 5 weren't any better. Even though they knew since long ago that Feng Tianwu possessed the fire spirit body, And besides having shocking natural talent in the martial Dao, she possessed unique comprehension towards fire concept as well. But never had they imagined that Feng Qianwu had actually comprehended 4th-level intermediate fire concept, and this comprehension ability had already far left her natural talent behind. I comprehended it in the illusory crypt yesterday, Feng Tianwu said. Lingtian, you knew since long ago? Feng Wudao noticed that Duan Lingtian had a calm expression from the beginning until the end, and he faintly realized this. Duan Lingtian nodded with a light smile. Feng Wudao sighed when he saw this. Everyone says that girls side with outsiders. Looks like it's really so. She still hasn't married, and if she does, then I'm afraid I'm even more unnecessary as a father. Father, what are you talking about? It was elder brother Duan himself who saw through it, and it wasn't me who told him. At the same time that Feng Qianwu was slightly speechless, her beautiful face was tainted with a wisp of crimson red, and she was like a shy bud that was about to bloom. Continue. Ning Can's voice descended from the sky, and it caused the attention of everyone to move away from Feng Tianwu. Zhang Shouyong had failed in his challenge. Now, only the possessor of the number 12 token, Su Li, and the possessor of the number 13 token remained. So long as they succeeded in their challenges, they would be able to be ranked in the top 10 of the martial competition. Su Li flew out, and his gaze locked onto the possessor of the number 10 token at the first possible moment, the Dartang dynasty's 11th prince Li Ji. I challenge the possessor of the number 10 token. Su Li issued the challenge. Instantly, Li Ji flew out to stand in confrontation with Su Li, and he revealed a disdainful expression. A mere 2nd-level void interpretation stage martial artist like you isn't a match for me. We'll only know if I'm a match for you after we try. Su Li spoke with a calm expression as a grade 3 spirit sword appeared out of thin air in his hand, and a peerlessly fierce aura arose from it. It was precisely sword concept. 2nd-level void interpretation stage, 2nd-level intermediate sword concept comprehended. Your strength isn't bad, but unfortunately, my cultivation is a level higher than yours, and I'm bound to surpass you. Li Ji's eyes narrowed as he spoke, and he knew Su Li's strength like the back of his hand. But in next to no time, his narrowed eyes suddenly stared wide open, and he revealed an expression of disbelief as if he'd seen something that shocked him. At this moment, 40 ancient horned dragon silhouettes had appeared out of thin air in the sky above Su Li. This was the strength contained within the sword concept that Su Li revealed under the precondition that he didn't utilize his origin energy. 3rd-level intermediate sword concept. You just comprehended it? Li Ji sucked in a breath of cold air and asked in surprise. Make your move. Su Li spoke indifferently as the 3-foot-long blade in his hand trembled and poured his origin energy into it. Instantly, the phenomenon of the heavens and the earth in the sky underwent a change. At the side of the 40 ancient horned dragon silhouettes, another 30 ancient horned dragon silhouettes appeared out of thin air. And then another 20 ancient horned dragon silhouettes appeared. 90 ancient horned dragon silhouettes accumulated force and were ready to fight by Su Li's side at any moment. Humph. Do you think you're a match for me? Li Ji laughed with ridicule and grunted coldly. Even if my concept is inferior to yours, my cultivation is superior to yours, and coupled with the amplification of a grade 3 spirit weapon, my strength still far surpasses yours. As soon as he finished speaking, a 7-foot-long spear appeared in Li Ji's hand. An origin energy flashed on the spear before transforming into a layer of material earth concept. Whoosh! The phenomenon of the heavens and the earth appeared abruptly in the sky. First, 30 ancient horned dragon silhouettes appeared. Then another 40 ancient horned dragon silhouettes appeared. And then another 27 ancient horned dragon silhouettes appeared. Li Ji's cultivation was at the 3rd level of the void interpretation stage. He'd comprehended 2nd-level intermediate earth concept, and he held a grade 3 spirit spear in his hand. When he exerted his full strength, it was comparable to the strength of 97 ancient horned dragons. Compared to Su Li, he possessed an entire strength of 7 ancient horned dragons. All of this didn't stop because of this. Along with a strand of light azure energy appearing on the 7-foot-long spear in Li Ji's hand, another 3 ancient horned dragon silhouettes appeared above him. Third level elementary wind concept. The strongest strength Li Ji possessed now was comparable to the strength of 100 ancient horned dragons. I'll let you know that the difference of the strength of 10 ancient horned dragons is sufficient to allow me to completely crush you. Li Ji shouted out lightly as he flew out, and the 7-foot-long spear in his hand tore through the sky like a worm leaving its lair, and it moved menacingly and gave rise to waves of ear-piercing sounds of air exploding. Swoosh! Everywhere the spear pointed, it was earth-shattering. When this spear flashed out, it seemed as if it could even pierce a hole in the sky, let alone a human's body. The strength of 100 ancient horned dragons? Is it very strong? Su Li moved over unhurriedly, and he held the sword with both hands before abruptly raising it above his head. Instantly, the origin energy on Su Li's body soared and enveloped him and his sword within it, and it seemed as if he'd transformed into an enormous sword that was accumulating strength while waiting to attack. After the enormous sword appeared, the milky white appearance of the origin energy suddenly underwent a tremendous change. In the blink of an eye, it transformed into jade ripples that ceaselessly pulsated. Material water concept. This fellow Su Li has actually been concealing his strength all along? Duan Lingtian's gaze raised, and he revealed a surprised expression. Swish! Chapter 8:16. At this instant, a tremendous change occurred in the phenomenon of the heavens and the earth in the sky. At the side of the 90 ancient horned dragon silhouettes, another 20 ancient horned dragon silhouettes appeared, and they were lifelike and possessed imposing auras that shot into the sky like a rainbow. First level intermediate water concept. The enormous sword soared through the sky and contained the strength of 110 ancient horned dragons. The strength of 100 ancient horned dragons? Is it very strong? At this moment, it wasn't only Li Ji's expression that went grim. The words Su Li spoke earlier resounded in his ears. Even the surrounding crowd of spectators couldn't help but recall Su Li's words. No one had imagined that Su Li had actually concealed his strength at the beginning, and the strongest strength he could exert was comparable to the strength of 110 ancient horned dragons. Before the strength of 110 ancient horned dragons, the strength of 100 ancient horned dragons was indeed nothing. Unity of man and sword. The enormous sword fiercely collided with the 7-foot-long spear in Li Ji's hand, and with a shake of the spear, the web between Li Ji's thumb and index finger split open, causing fresh blood to spray out, and his face was even ghastly pale. Ah! Li Ji opened his mouth with great difficulty and spat out a mouthful of dazzling and resplendent blood. At the same time that he spat out this mouthful of blood, the enormous sword soared through the sky once more as it charged over. Bang! The spear in Li Ji's hand was blasted away with a single sword strike, and a terrifying force descended onto his body, causing him to fly out like an arrow that left the bow, and he was in an extremely sorry state. When he stood up once more, his body was already on the verge of collapse, and he didn't have the strength to continue fighting. You've won. Li Ji, who had a ghastly pale face, coughed repeatedly, and every time he coughed, a mouthful of blood would be spat out. Obviously, he'd suffered a heavy injury. Li Ji stared fixedly at the enormous sword that stopped in the distance, and the jade-like appearance of the enormous sword and the fierce aura emitted from it brought extreme pressure to him. He knew clearly in his heart that Su Li had shown mercy earlier. If Su Li didn't withdraw his strength in time, he would have already been killed by the enormous sword that soared through the sky earlier. Whoosh! After Li Ji admitted defeat, the enormous sword that was condensed from completely material water concept, origin energy, and sword concept vanished right after, and Su Li's proud figure appeared. Comprehending two types of intermediate concept. The possessor of this number 12 token seems to be a member of the Dark Han dynasty. One of the people in the top 10 was replaced by someone from the Dark Han dynasty. Since then, the people from the Dark Han dynasty have occupied 4 spots in the top 10. The Dark Han dynasty is going to defy the heavens. Many people couldn't help but gasp at the same time. The martial competition of the 10 dynasties was originally a stage for the young geniuses of the 10 great dynasties, yet now the Dark Han dynasty had already occupied 4 of the top 10 positions. Even if the remaining possessor of the number 13 token challenged any young genius in the Dark Han dynasty and succeeded, there would still be 3 people from the Dark Han dynasty that were ranked in the top 10 of the martial competition in the end. Suli, this guy really hit himself well. Duan Lingtian shook his head lightly. It was the first time he'd seen Suli execute water concept, and it was even void interpretation concept. Although it was inferior to his sword concept, it wasn't much inferior. There's one thing I'm extremely curious about. Suddenly, Li Ji, who just consumed the medicinal pill and his injuries had eased up, looked at Suli and took a deep breath before asking. Since your full strength is comparable to the strength of 110 ancient horned dragons, why did you spend so much time in the illusory crypt before coming out, and you only obtained command token number 12? What Li Ji asked was what most people including Duan Lingtian wanted to ask as well. For a time, all of them looked curiously at Suli as they wanted to know how Suli would answer. I want to try what number token I can obtain without utilizing water concept, Suli replied indifferently before flying off, and he returned to Sword 13's side after a short moment before standing there silently. The corners of Li Ji's mouth couldn't help but twitch when he heard Suli's reply. If it was another person, that person would have probably utilized all his ability in the illusory crypt since long ago. But this Suli was actually still concealing his ability. Willful. For a time, the same thought couldn't help but emerge in the hearts of most of the people present. Suli's actions could be said to be willful, yet he had the ability to be willful. Ha 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 ha. After being stunned for a short moment, the Dark Han dynasty's emperor laughed heartily, and his laughter was wanton and ostentatious. As the emperor of the Dark Han dynasty, 4 of the 10 young geniuses from his Dark Han dynasty had charged into the top 10 of the martial competition of the 10 dynasties. Number 13. Ning King glanced indifferently at the possessor of the number 13 token. Instantly, the possessor of the number 13 token flew out. The possessor of the number 13 token that was lucky and had a buy was an expressionless young man in plain clothes, and his pair of ordinary eyes flashed with a strand of fierce bright light from time to time. The possessor of the number 1 token. After the young man in plain clothes appeared, his target was Duan Lingtian. Obviously, he was like most people and questioned the value of the number 1 token in Duan Lingtian's possession. Even though Duan Lingtian was surprised when being challenged, he wasn't surprised, and he directly flew out to meet the young man in plain clothes. With a raise of his hand, a sword appeared in the young man's hand, a crimson-red sword. Grade 3 Spirit Sword. With a single glance, Duan Lingtian discerned that the sword in the young man's hand was a Grade 3 Spirit Sword. And the young man in plain clothes was a sword cultivator just like Suli Kill. The young man in plain clothes attacked without the slightest sign, and he struck first to gain the upper hand. His entire body seemed to have transformed into a sharp arrow that was shot out from a bow to lock onto Duan Lingtian. Swish! The coldness of a sword strike that came from the west seemed to be able to wither everything and destroy everything easily. Arctic Forsaken Sword. As soon as the young man in plain clothes attacked, Duan Lingtian's pupils couldn't help but constrict, and it was for no other reason than because of the sword skill executed by the young man in plain clothes. Arctic Forsaken Sword, a low-grade heaven rank sword skill. Once cultivated, it was able to allow the fierce sword concept to develop extreme cold chi that wasn't ice but ice. Once the sword was drawn, everything in the world withered, and this was how it got its name. This sword skill was precisely the first heaven rank martial skill that Emperor Wu of Samsara came into contact with in his first lifetime. When Samsara Emperor Wu was young, he'd once relied on this sword skill to become the number 1 expert in the younger generation of a certain area in the foreign lands. Even though he rarely used this sword skill after that, Emperor Wu of Samsara had never forgotten this sword skill that held extraordinary meaning to him. The young man in plain clothes attacked, and the 90 ancient horned dragon silhouettes and a few thousand ancient mammoth silhouettes attacked at the same time, causing the airflow in the air to roil and give rise to waves of violent winds that blew to the point the clothes of everyone in the sky above the combat ring fluttered. However, at this moment no one paid attention to this. Besides the group of people that knew Duan Lingtian's ability, the remaining people stared fixedly at the young man in plain clothes. They were curious if the young man in plain clothes would really be able to defeat Duan Lingtian and replace him to seize the number 1 token. Perhaps, I can give it a try. When faced with the attack of the young man in plain clothes, Duan Lingtian muttered to himself and made a bold decision. In the next moment, a sword appeared out of thin air in Duan Lingtian's hand. It was a grade 3 spirit sword. Then let's see if the Arctic Withering Sword that's powered by sword concept that gives birth to cold chi is stronger. Or if the Arctic Withering Sword that's powered by wind concept is stronger. Duan Lingtian muttered in a low voice, and his gaze abruptly became fierce as it shot directly at the young man in plain clothes. Swish! Duan Lingtian's figure flashed out as the sword in his hand shook, and he instantly struck out to intercept the sword in the hand of the young man in plain clothes that emitted a cold and withering aura. Arctic Withering Sword. A similar sword skill was easily executed by Duan Lingtian. So long as it was someone with discerning eyes, they would be able to easily discern that the sword skill executed by Duan Lingtian now was even more formidable than the sword skill executed by the young man in plain clothes. It surpassed the young man in plain clothes in terms of cultivation. The sword concept of the sword of the young man in plain clothes was suffused with icy coldness, and it contained dense withering aura that seemed capable of withering everything. The coldness of the wind concept in Duan Lingtian's sword was even colder, and the withering aura completely crushed the withering aura contained within the sword in the hand of the young man in plain clothes. At the same time that Duan Lingtian struck out with his sword, 91 ancient horned dragon silhouettes appeared in the sky above him, and they dashed out along with him. The strength of Duan Lingtian's sword was only a few thousand ancient mammoths stronger than the strength of the young man's sword. This bit of difference in strength was practically negligible. However, when Duan Lingtian's sword struck out, the icy coldness and withering aura contained within the wind concept easily crushed the sword in the hand of the young man in plain clothes when it collided with it. It was a complete and utter suppression. With just a single strike, the sword in the hand of the young man in plain clothes was blasted flying, and his entire body was blasted flying by an enormous force. Trash. You piece of trash. Long Yun shrunk back at the side with an aggrieved expression. Who did I offend? I was able to be slapped even while standing silently at the side. Duan Lingtian and the others burst into laughter when they saw Sword 5's actions. The third round of the selections has ended. The fourth round of the selections will be held tomorrow at the same time, and it's also the final round of the selections. At that time, the specific rankings of the top 10 will be decided. After Ningkan withdrew his cold and fierce gaze from Duan Lingtian, he looked at the surroundings and spoke in a clear voice. As soon as he finished speaking, he left with Zishang. Feng Wei brought Lu Yong along and followed closely behind. As for the others, they took a few more glances at Duan Lingtian before leaving. During these past 2 days, the person that received the most attention was undoubtedly Duan Lingtian. First, he'd obtained the number 1 token in the second round of the selections, and then he'd revealed a comprehension ability and martial skills that was sufficient to shock anyone. Duan Lingtian didn't mind that he'd become the center of everyone's discussion, and he seemed as if he'd been accustomed to it since long ago. The next day arrived as scheduled. Early in the morning, the representatives and young geniuses of the 10 dynasties including Duan Lingtian had arrived in the sky above the Skywolf Fort's combat arena, and they were waiting for the 2 vice fort masters of Skywolf Fort to make an appearance. Whoosh! Whoosh! After a short moment, the 2 vice fort masters of Skywolf Fort, Ningkan and Feng Wei, appeared, and Zishang and Lu Yong followed closely behind them to arrive in the sky above the combat arena. The fourth round of the selections will be held today, and it's also the final round of the selections. Ningkan looked at the surroundings and spoke in a clear voice. The young geniuses that are ranked in the top 10 of the martial competition of the 10 dynasties will be able to obtain different rewards bestowed by our Skywolf Fort according to their ranking. So I hope the 10 young geniuses can go all out. Ningkan continued. Instantly, the gazes of the 10 young geniuses including Duan Lingtian lit up. The rewards of the Skywolf Fort presumably weren't ordinary. After the martial competition of the 10 dynasties ends today, the representatives of the 10 dynasties present here will similarly be able to obtain the rewards bestowed by our Skywolf Fort. Of course, the rewards won't be the same. Ningkan continued. Many representatives had expressions of anticipation when they heard this. Especially the Dark Han dynasty's emperor. He smiled to the point his eyes narrowed. For people from the Dark Han dynasty had entered the top 10 of the martial competition of the 10 dynasties this time, so the rewards of his Dark Han dynasty would presumably be the most generous amongst the 10 dynasties. The rules of the fourth round of the selections are still the same. The possessor of the number 1 token is the first to issue a challenge, and the possessor of the number 1 token is able to challenge anyone starting from the possessor of the number 2 token. Besides being unable to challenge the possessor of the number 1 token, the possessor of the number 2 token is able to challenge anyone starting from the possessor of the number 3 token, and so on and so forth. The possessor of the number 10 token doesn't have the right to choose and can only be chosen. Once the challenge fails, the challenger will be replaced by the opponent, and the 2 tokens will be exchanged. Until no one accepts the challenge, the specific rankings of the top 10 will be listed according to the number token. Ningkan said slowly, besides that, once the person that fought in the previous round is challenged by the person that fought in the next round, the person can use resting as an excuse to refuse. Duan Lingtian's brows raised, and he revealed a brilliant smile as he looked at the number 1 token in his hand. Looks like this number 1 token is extremely useful in the fourth round. No one was able to issue a challenge to him while holding the number 1 token, and they could only be challenged by him. Of course, Duan Lingtian knew clearly that if he wanted to obtain the first in the martial competition this time, then he must always hold the number 1 token in his hand. In other words, he could only obtain the first in the martial competition after he challenged the other 9 people, and obtained 9 successive victories. Is there anything else you don't understand? Ningkan swept the surroundings with his gaze as he asked with a low voice. All the young geniuses shook their heads in unison. Presently, besides Duan Lingtian and the other 10 young geniuses that had obtained the qualifications to participate in the fourth round of the selections, the young geniuses that were eliminated and survived yesterday were present as well. But they didn't have the chance to enter the arena today, and they could only act as spectators and witness the competition between the 10 young geniuses that held the number 1 to 10 tokens. Since it's like this, I announce. Ningkan was just about to announce the start of the fourth round of the selections when he suddenly seemed to have noticed something, and his voice stopped abruptly. Subsequently, he suddenly raised his head to look up into the sky, and his gaze went slightly cold as he shouted with a grim voice. "Who's there? You actually dare trespass into my Sky Wolf fort?" When Ningkan raised his head, Feng Wei had raised his head as well, and he stared up into the sky with a cold and fierce gaze. Long before Ningkan had raised his head, Duan Lingtian had noticed that Sword 13 and Saber 5 had already raised their heads to look up into the sky, and he raised his head to look over as well. Buddha be praised. Vice Fort Master Ning, this monk has been rude. Right when everyone in the sky above the combat arena had raised their heads to look up into the sky, a bald middle-aged man that wore a large red kasaya suddenly walked out from behind the clouds and mist in the horizon. There were 6 scars on the bald middle-aged man's head. This is a monk? Duan Lingtian was stunned as he looked at the bald middle-aged man before him. He was too familiar with the appearance of this bald middle-aged man. Weren't those monks that abstained from meat and recited Buddhist scriptures on earth in his previous life exactly like this? At this instant, a feeling of intimacy couldn't help but arise in Duan Lingtian's heart. It was for no other reason than the monk that had appeared before him. So there are monks in this world as well. Right when Senior protected me from Feng Wei and Dongguo Lei earlier, he seemed to have mentioned some bald donkey to Feng Wei. Could it be that he was talking about monks? For a time, Duan Lingtian couldn't help but recall the scenes when Feng Wei and Dongguo Lei came to look for him that day. At that time, he clearly remembered what Sword 13 had said to Feng Wei. According to my knowledge, besides our blade sect, those bald donkeys know as well. These were Sword 13's exact words at that time. At that time, Duan Lingtian had never connected the bald donkeys Sword 13 spoke of together with monks. Of course, this was because of his preconceived notion. If it was on Earth in his previous life and someone mentioned bald donkeys before him, the first thing he thought of would be monks. But in the cloud continent of this lifetime, not only had he never seen a monk before this, he'd never even heard of the existence of monks. At this moment, as he looked at the bald middle-aged man that wore a kasaya, Duan Lingtian realized that there were monks in this world as well. Moreover, they weren't ordinary monks. Bald donkey Hui Ming, you really came at the right time. Aren't you going to make those two bald donkeys behind you show themselves? Sword 13 looked at the middle-aged monk that had just passed through the clouds and mist, and he spoke indifferently. Vice Sect Master Jian, this monk greets you. Hui Ming wasn't enraged when he was called a bald donkey by Sword 13, and he pressed his palms together as he bowed before his figure flashed out to descend from the sky. At the same time, another middle-aged monk appeared behind him, and another young monk followed closely behind him. Chapter 8:18. Who are they? The clothes they wear are really strange. I've never seen people like this. Not only did they shave their heads, they even made so many scars on their heads. They really have nothing better to do. They called themselves poor monks? Besides that, what's the meaning of Umitba? The representatives and young geniuses of the various dynasties discussed animatedly. They'd never seen a person dressed like this. Of course, there were also a few representatives of the dynasties that frowned tightly, and then they seemed to have thought of something and exclaimed in a low voice. I heard that there are some formidable sects in the foreign lands, and the people within are all bald and have ring scars on their heads. They abstain from lust and meat, and they concentrate on the martial Tao. Their martial strength is profound. Right. I've heard of it as well. Supposedly, they're called holy monks by the ordinary people of the foreign lands, but the martial artists of the foreign lands generally call them monks. I never imagined that monks really exist. I wonder if they really abstain from lust and meat. Without the pleasures of men and women, without the luxury of fish and meat, just thinking about it makes me feel bad. The voices of the representatives of the various dynasties clearly entered into the ears of the others. Monks? Abstain from lust and meat? Besides Duan Lingtian, the other representatives and young geniuses of the 10 dynasties were dumbstruck. There's actually people like this. Abstain from lust and meat, and concentrate on the martial Tao. If they're unable to become experts, then there's really no justice in the world. I wouldn't want to be an expert like this even if it was given to me. Everyone has their own aspirations, and their thoughts are naturally different. For a time, the scene was clamorous because of the arrival of the 3 monks. Duan Lingtian couldn't restrain the curiosity in his heart as he looked at the 3 monks, and his spiritual force swept out to touch the young monk at the first possible moment because he was the weakest. The young monk was around the age of 35 with a handsome appearance and a calm gaze, and he seemed to be senile as if he'd already seen through the mortal world. 6th level of the void interpretation stage? Duan Lingtian's pupils couldn't help but constrict when he detected the young monk's cultivation. Never had he imagined that this monk that was similar in age to most of the young geniuses of the 10 dynasties would actually be in existence at the 6th level of the void interpretation stage. This was truly inconceivable. Where exactly are these monks from? If a young monk is so strong, then wouldn't these 2 middle-aged monks be? Before Duan Lingtian could finish his thought, the spirit energy that was flying towards the middle-aged monk, Hui Ming, suddenly paused and disappeared without a trace as if it had sunk into the ocean. Young benefactor, you are so young, yet you have such attainments in spiritual power. It is really surprising. At the same time, a voice sounded in Duan Lingtian's ears. It was Hui Ming's voice. Duan Lingtian couldn't help but take a deep breath, his eyes filled with fear. He knew that this Hui Ming ought to be an expert at the same level as Ningcan and Jian 13, and he was in existence at the 7th level of the void transformation stage or above. Besides, behind Hui Ming, there was definitely a colossus that could stand on equal footing with Skywolf Fort and Blade Sect. Hui Ming glanced at Duan Lingtian in a friendly manner before looking at Saber 5. Vice Sect Leader Saber, long time no see. How have you been? Of course it's for your own good. Saber 5 grunted and seemed to be extremely displeased with Hui Ming. Hui Ming wasn't angry, and then he looked at Feng Wei and greeted. Vice Fort Master Feng, this monk greets you. Hui Ming, Hui Jing, take that little bald donkey and leave quickly. Our Skywolf Fort doesn't welcome all of you. Feng Wei spoke with a low voice. At the same time, he looked at the distant Sword 13 and seemed to be reminding Sword 13 of something. Bald Donkey Hui Ming, we're clearly aware of the reason you've come. But my Blade Sect has already come to an agreement with Skywolf Fort, so I'm afraid your Empyrean Temple won't be able to come in and get a share of the profits. Sword 13 looked at Hui Ming and spoke slowly. His voice wasn't loud, yet it contained an indisputable tone. Vice Sect Leader Jian, since this monk has made an appearance, then I naturally have the confidence to interfere. Hui Ming smiled indifferently, and his face that was tranquil like an ancient well faintly contained slight confidence. No matter if it was the Vice Fort Masters of Skywolf Fort, Ning Can, Feng Wei, or the Blade Sect's Sword 13 and Saber 5, their expressions instantly went grim when they heard Hui Ming. At the same time, they raised their heads in unison to look up into the sky. Since you've come, then why hide? Ning Can spoke with a loud voice. At practically the instant Ning Can finished speaking, a middle-aged man in cloth clothes flashed out from behind the clouds and mist in the horizon to appear before everyone. The middle-aged man had an ordinary appearance, yet his body faintly emitted an aura that kept others away. Obviously, the cultivation technique he cultivated was special. The middle-aged man had a calm expression that was neither happy nor angry, and his eyes were dim and lusterless, causing him to seem to be even more destitute than the three monks. Payan. The expressions of Ning Can and Feng Wei sank when they saw this middle-aged man in cloth clothes, and even the expressions of Sword 13 and Saber 5 were unsightly. Obviously, they'd never imagined that this person would come. Whoosh! The middle-aged man's figure flashed and descended gracefully from the sky. Another person appeared behind the clouds and mist behind him, and it was a young man with a calm expression who similarly wore cloth clothes. The young man followed closely behind the middle-aged man and descended together with him. It's him. The young man had just appeared when Duan Lingtian's pupils couldn't help but constrict, and he had an astounded expression. He knew this young man and had come into contact with him in the past, but never had he imagined that the young man would appear here. It wasn't only Duan Lingtian that was indescribably astounded, even Zishang and Long Yun had astounded expressions at this moment, and they seemed as if they'd seen a ghost. Why would he be here? The same thought arose in the hearts of both of them. Duan Lingtian. Isn't he one of the 5 great young masters of the Azure Forest Imperial Kingdom, Flame Young Master? Suddenly, Su Li stood by Duan Lingtian's side and asked with slight hesitation. Su Li remembered it clearly. That day, when he participated in the genius competition of the Azure Forest Imperial Kingdom, he'd once seen this young man in cloth clothes that descended from the sky, and he seemed to be one of the 5 great young masters of the Azure Forest Imperial Kingdom, Flame Young Master. He seemed to be called Zhang Yan. Flame Young Master Zhang Yan. He still remembered that during the genius competition that day, Zhang Yan was eliminated from the 5 positions because of his arrival, and he was unable to head to the Darkstone Empire to participate in the Young Genius competition of the Empire. Shouldn't Zhang Yan be living an ordinary life in the Azure Forest Imperial Kingdom? Why has he appeared here? Moreover, he's following an expert that even his master seems to be slightly fearful of. Someone that was capable of causing his master to be fearful was undoubtedly an expert that could be considered to be extraordinary in the foreign lands. Sect Leader Pei. Hui Ming and Hui Jing pressed their palms together as they looked at the middle-aged man in cloth clothes and bowed lightly. Sect Leader. Sword 13, Ning Can, Saber 5, and Feng Wei were greatly shocked when they heard the 2 monks. Obviously, they'd never imagined that the middle-aged man in cloth clothes before them had actually become the sect leader of that sect. They were clearly aware of what this meant. Pain, you've stepped into that stage? Saber 5 gasped. Even though he'd guessed it in his heart, he still couldn't refrain from asking. Payan looked at Hui Ming and Hui Jing and nodded indifferently, and then he looked at Saber 5 and spoke slowly with a calm and empty voice. Saber 5, you seem to have not improved in these past few years? Saber 5 was angered to the point his face flushed red. Yet he was speechless. If it was another person, he'd have slashed over since long ago. But this middle-aged man before him wasn't someone he could go against. As a member of the same generation, the halos on the middle-aged man even surpassed his junior brother, Sword 13. In their generation, Sword 13 could be considered to be the #1 person in the Blade sect. Who are you? You actually dare humiliate my master? Saber 5 didn't react, yet Long Yun was enraged instead, and he took a step forward and glared angrily at Paeon. In his heart, his master didn't allow anyone to disrespect him. Slap! A clear sound of a slap resounded out, and Long Yun's head tilted as a burning palm print appeared on his face. At the same time, a young man in cloth clothes appeared before Long Yun, and he looked at Long Yun with an expressionless face. The person that slapped Long Yun earlier was precisely this person. Zhang Yan, you're courting death. Long Yun was slapped to the point he was dazed, and when he recovered from his shock, he revealed a savage expression as he raised his saber to flash out and slash towards the person before him, and it seemed as if he wanted to slash the person into two. Whoosh! Long Yun attacked with rage and exerted his full strength. His cultivation at the second level of the Void Interpretation stage and first level saber concept were fully revealed, and when combined with the Grade 3 Spirit Saber, he drew upon the energy of the heavens and the earth to develop the strength of 70 ancient horned dragons. Zhang Yan still had an expressionless face when facing a saber strike that contained the strength of 70 ancient horned dragons, and it was as if he didn't see it. Right when many people thought that Zhang Yan would be slashed into two by Long Yun's saber strike. Clang! An enormous bang sounded out, and it caused the scene to fall into deathly silence. Under the gazes of everyone present, Long Yun's full-strength saber strike that contained the strength of 70 ancient horned dragons was actually received by the young man in cloth clothes with his bare hands. Moreover, he'd only used 2 fingers, his thumb and index finger. The 2 fingers that were coiled by a layer of material water concept held onto the saber and blocked Long Yun's furious strike. Ha! Long Yun shouted out explosively and wanted to withdraw the Grade 3 Spirit Saber in his hand, yet he noticed that Zhang Yan's hand was like an iron pincer, causing him to be utterly unable to withdraw the saber. How could this be possible? For a time, Long Yun's pupils constricted as he had an astounded expression, and he looked with disbelief at Zhang Yan, who looked at him with an expressionless face. How could you possibly possess such a formidable strength? At this moment it wasn't only Long Yun who was astounded. Duanling Tian Zishang, Su Li, and all the others that knew of Zhang Yan's past were extremely shocked by the strength Zhang Yan revealed now. It has only been a few years. How could this Zhang Yan possibly possess such a formidable strength? As he looked at the 150 ancient horned dragon silhouettes that ceaselessly fluttered about in the sky above Zhang Yan, Duanling Tian felt his heartbeat quicken to a terrifying degree. When his spiritual force stretched out, he detected Zhang Yan's current cultivation. Sixth level of the Void Interpretation stage. Duanling Tian's face went grim. Never had he imagined that in a short few years, Zhang Yan would actually possess such a formidable cultivation. The strength of 150 ancient horned dragons. Cultivation at the 6th level of the Void Interpretation stage accounted for 80. Chapter 8:19. In Duanling Tian's mind, the memories related to Zhang Yan still stopped at a few years ago. At that time, Zhang Yan had once fought him in the Azure Forest Imperial Kingdom because of Zishang's younger sister, Ziyan. After that, they even had some conflicts because of Ziyan's hatred towards him. Of course, they were all small conflicts that weren't worth mentioning. At that time, Zhang Yan's strength was far inferior to him. It was even to the extent that Zhang Yan wasn't even able to seize one of the final 5 positions in the Azure Forest Imperial Kingdom's genius competition that led to the martial competition of the 10 dynasties. Never had he imagined that a person like this, a person that was eliminated in the Azure Forest Imperial Kingdom's genius competition all those years ago, would actually bring along such a terrifying strength when he appeared once more. Zhang Yan's current strength had already surpassed him in all aspects, and even if he utilized all his abilities and utilized the soul skill 1000 illusions, he wouldn't be a match for Zhang Yan. What exactly has this Zhang Yan encountered to actually become so strong? In the distance, Zishang stared fixedly at Zhang Yan, and his face was similarly filled with bewilderment. With the strength Zhang Yan revealed now, even if he allowed Elder Ghost's incomplete soul to possess him, he would probably only be able to fight Zhang Yan to a tie. Unless he was able to break through to the third level of the void interpretation stage, and at that time he would be able to easily defeat Zhang Yan. Because at that time, Elder Ghost would possess a strength at the 7th level of the void interpretation stage after possessing him. As far as he was concerned at that time, it would be equivalent to him being a 7th level void interpretation stage martial artist, and it wouldn't be difficult for him to defeat Zhang Yan. This Zhang Yan is like a completely different person when compared to when I met him for the first time. Su Li took a deep breath, and he was extremely shocked by the strength Zhang Yan possessed now. Out of consideration for the fact that we're both from the Azure Forest Imperial Kingdom, I won't kill you. Zhang Yan's fingers shook and easily blasted away the grade 3 spirit saber in Long Yan's hand, and then his figure flashed to return behind the middle-aged man before standing there silently. Payan, this is your disciple? He really has a good upbringing. Saber 5's face sank. How could he not be enraged when his disciple was taught a lesson before him? Saber 5, it's better to let the matters of the young deal with themselves. Or perhaps you want to stand up for your disciple and deal with my disciple? Pain said faintly, you Saber 5 shouldn't be so depraved. Saber 5 was instantly stunned when he heard this, yet he had nothing to say in reply. He could only glare at Long Yun with disappointment, causing the bitterness on Long Yun's face to grow even more. Huiming, you win. Ningqiang glared hatefully at Huiming. He had never expected that Huiming seemed to have known that the Blade Sect would stand on his side and had even found helpers. At this time, even if the Skywolf Fort and the Blade Sect worked together, they would not be able to chase him away. Another emotion-severing sect has come to take a share of the pie. Jian Shusan shook his head, and then he seemed to have thought of something and muttered. However, it doesn't matter. With the three of them it's more or less enough. After muttering to himself, Jian Shusan glanced at Duan Lingtian, Feng Tianwu and Zhang Shouyong, and the more he looked the more satisfied he was. Duan Lingtian, who was standing at the side, was filled with confusion. First 3 monks had come, then a common-clothed middle-aged man had come, and he'd even brought Zhang Yan over. Moreover, this common-clothed middle-aged man seemed to be the master of a sect, and he was even Zhang Yan's master. What exactly is going on? Duan Lingtian was unable to wrap his head around it no matter how hard he racked his brains. Ba. Vice Fort Master Ning, you don't have to pay attention to us. Feel free to do what you need to do. As for Sect Master Pei, we'll entertain him on your behalf. Huiming smiled as she spoke to Ning Can, and her appearance was as infuriating as it could be. Ning Can was angered to the point his face was livid, but since the matter had developed to this extent, it wasn't good for him to say anything further. He looked at the surroundings and said with a low voice, "The 4th round of the selections begin." Duan Lingtian was just about to ask Jian Shusan about the 3 monks and the common-clothed middle-aged man when he heard Ning Can's voice, and he temporarily suppressed the bewilderment in his heart before flying out. When Duan Lingtian arrived at the central area of the sky above the combat arena, the representatives and young geniuses of the 10 dynasties had all recovered from their shock. The appearance of the 3 monks and the common-clothed middle-aged man and young man caused them to be bewildered as well. They were able to discern that no matter if it was the 3 monks or the middle-aged man and young man, their origins were obviously extremely extraordinary. Otherwise, it wouldn't be to the extent of causing the 2 vice fort masters of Skywolf Fort to lose their composure like that. Now, when Ning Can announced the start of the 4th round of the selections, all of them suppressed the bewilderment in their hearts and looked at Duan Lingtian in unison. I wonder who Duan Lingtian will challenge first. Someone was filled with curiosity towards this. The possessor of the number 10 token is Duan Lingtian's friend, and he probably won't be the first to challenge. I think that he'll probably challenge the possessor of the number 9 token. Many people looked at the group of the Darqing dynasty, and their gazes descended onto Yiling. Yiling was slightly eager to give it a try when being looked at by many gazes, and she wished for nothing more than for Duan Lingtian to challenge her. Perhaps she would be able to obtain the number 1 token because of this. But unfortunately, Duan Lingtian didn't even spare a glance at her. I challenge, Duan Lingtian spoke slowly, and then he paused for a moment before continuing. The possessor of the number 2 token, Zishang. Zishang. As soon as Duan Lingtian spoke these words, the scene was in an uproar. Most people had never imagined that Duan Lingtian would challenge Zishang, and only those that knew of the conflict between Duan Lingtian and Duan Lingtian knew why Duan Lingtian would make such a choice. For a time, the gazes of many people descended onto Zishang, and they were extremely curious towards the true strength of this personal disciple of the Vice Fort Master of Skywolf Fort, Zishang. Based on the strength Zishang revealed earlier, it ought to be insufficient to obtain the number 2 token. But since he was able to obtain the number 2 token and was able to make Vice Fort Master Ning take him as a personal disciple, it was sufficient to show that he wasn't simple, and perhaps he'd concealed his true strength since the beginning. Zishang, Vice Fort Master Ning's personal disciple. Duan Lingtian, the person that refused to become Vice Fort Master Ning's personal disciple. The battle between the two of them will surely be extremely exciting. I feel that Duan Lingtian has probably concealed his strength as well. Every single time he makes a move, he seems to have only revealed the tip of the iceberg. I have this feeling as well. Since he's able to obtain the number 1 token, I presume he has true ability. Unknowingly, many people's impression of Duan Lingtian had changed, and they didn't unanimously feel that Duan Lingtian had obtained the number 1 token through trickery any longer. Ning Can's personal disciple? The sounds of discussion in the surroundings caused the two middle-aged men, Shang Huiming and Huijing, to simultaneously follow the gazes of everyone to look at Zishang. Even the common-clothed middle-aged man, Peiyan, the master of Zhongyan, had his gaze descended onto Zishang at this moment. Zishang. Zhongyan still had an expressionless face, but the depths of his eyes were obviously filled with slight surprise. Obviously, he'd never imagined that he would be able to see Zishang here. As for Duan Lingtian, he'd noticed Duan Lingtian when he'd just arrived, and even though he was slightly surprised that Duan Lingtian was able to appear here, he wasn't too shocked. After all, when he was in the Azure Forest Imperial Kingdom that day, Duan Lingtian had revealed terrifying natural talent, and it wasn't strange for him to possess his current accomplishments. When he saw Duan Lingtian once more, he didn't look at Duan Lingtian with hatred like before, and perhaps it was because he'd already completely severed his relationship with Duan Lingtian. In the past he'd emptied his heart for Zishang's younger sister, Ziyan, yet in the end it was all for naught. Since the moment Ziyan swore on the 99 heavenly tribulation that it would be impossible for her to like him in her entire lifetime, he was completely disheartened and even wanted to die. But unfortunately he didn't die. Later on, he encountered an emotion-severing sect disciple by chance that had come out to relax, and under the sympathy of fellow sufferers, he followed the disciple to join the emotion-severing sect. At the emotion-severing sect, he'd found his final home. His state at that time just happened to conform to the objective of the emotion-severing sect, so when he started cultivating, he advanced swiftly. Later on, he was even thought highly of by the vice-sect master of the emotion-severing sect, Peiyan, and he became Peiyan's personal disciple. After a few years of cultivation and coupled with the inexhaustible resources Peiyan gave him, his cultivation advanced by leaps and bounds, and his comprehension towards concept grew even deeper. Presently, even in the entire emotion-severing sect, there wasn't a second disciple in the younger generation that could defeat him. Not long ago, his master had broken through in his cultivation and smoothly succeeded the position of sect master of the emotion-severing sect, causing his status in the emotion-severing sect to rise along with it, and he was even publicly acknowledged as the successor of the next sect master of the emotion-severing sect. It was precisely because of this that when Zhang Yan saw Duan Lingtian once more, he completely didn't have the hatred from all those years ago. This was something Duan Lingtian noticed earlier, but he didn't know the reason. I admit defeat. Under the gazes of everyone present, Zishang, who was challenged by Duan Lingtian, didn't hesitate in the slightest to admit defeat. Admit defeat? For a time the scene was in an uproar. Besides a small number of people that knew that Duan Lingtian was capable of restraining Duan Lingtian, everyone else had puzzled expressions as they didn't know why Zishang didn't even have the courage to fight Duan Lingtian. Could it be that Duan Lingtian is really so strong? Even Zishang doesn't dare fight him. I think Zishang gave in to him instead. But he doesn't seem to get along well with Duan Lingtian. Moreover, he's the personal disciple of Vice Fort Master Ning. Logically speaking, it's impossible for him to give in to Duan Lingtian. No matter what, he doesn't even have the courage to enter the arena. Zishang is truly too cowardly. Waves of merciless ridicule entered into Zishang's ears, causing his expression to become completely gloomy. There was naturally a reason why he didn't dare accept Duan Lingtian's challenge. He knew clearly in his heart that with the hatred Duan Lingtian had towards him, once he dared enter the arena, Duan Lingtian would absolutely not hold back in the slightest and kill him. Even though he had the Elder Ghost as his trump card, this trump card of his just happened to be restrained by Duan Lingtian, and he was utterly unable to utilize it. Moreover, once he faced Duan Lingtian with his own strength, Duan Lingtian would be entirely capable of killing him before he could admit defeat once Duan Lingtian executed that illusory realm soul skill. So admitting defeat was his only choice, and also the best choice. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.